Good evening and welcome. This is the March 8th, 2023 public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including planned developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send its recommendation to City Council. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arevalo?
Here.
Commissioner Halleck? Here. Commissioner Hugo? Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Linwall?
Here.
Commissioner Medinchev?
Here.
Commissioner Puctel?
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Here.
Chair Rogers?
Present. So with 8 people present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Neighborhood and Land Use Planner Megan Jones, Planner Katie Ashbaugh, Assistant City Attorney Alex Ruggie, Planning Manager Liz Williams, and Interim Community Development Director Sarah Flax. This is a formal hearing and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time, so all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the commission regarding any matter on tonight's agenda will have the opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. Our procedure is to hear from the staff on the documents on file and then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After that, persons wishing to make a statement regarding the matter will have a chance to do so. Any person with a legal interest in property located within the defined notification requirements of the subject property may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When all supporting and opposing testimony and statements have been heard, the applicant or appellant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Then the commission will close the record and begin deliberations to consider the standards. The commission will make formal findings of fact based upon the testimony and evidence presented, guided by the standards, the commissioner's knowledge of our community, and the recommendations of staff. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memo. When testifying, please state your name and address for the record and sign in on the public comment sheet. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you are at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded on tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. We do have 2 items that were posted on the agenda. The first item, however, for 1566 Oak Avenue has been continued by court order until April 26, 2023. No additional notice will be provided, so if you're here to speak on that matter, you will have to return on April 26th. The other item that we do have on the agenda is 162131 Chicago Avenue, 22 PLND 0102. Is the applicant present? Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask that anybody who feels they may be speaking to us tonight on any matter, please be sworn at this time by raising your right hand. Do you swear or affirm throughout the short course of these proceedings to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. With that, we will move into our agenda. The first item we do have on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes for February 22nd, 2023. Is there a motion to approve?
I've got a comment. On page 9, it says Commissioner Halleck expressed, this is about the church that we reviewed last time. Commissioner Halleck expressed concerns regarding the timing of project financing and parking. I just wanted to elaborate on that in the meeting minutes. It's project financing, but it's fundraising specifically. And the point I was trying to make is that, and maybe I didn't make it clearly, but the point I was trying to make is that the housing cannot happen until the church vacates their existing property. And the church, when I asked about fundraising, said, well, they haven't even started yet. So the point is that these 2 projects, even though we approve them separately, are tied together because nothing can happen until the church moves out, and they can't move out until they raise enough funds to build the new church. So they're tied together. So I don't know how concisely say that, but somehow if that can be added.
All right. Commissioner Lindwall?
Yes, I actually have several additional corrections and additions. On bottom of page 2, under Commissioner questions, I'd just like to add that we're talking about the Illinois Housing Development Authority. On page 5, under number 3, I think we want to be saying, with respect to the alleged hardship or practical difficulty, it should be a portion of the lot is owned by the city, because in the way the whole project is structured, with the land swap, only a piece of the land that actually would contain the housing is owned by the city. And then on page 10 of 15, when we're motioning to begin a new case after 10 p.m., should be Commissioner Halleck. He'd make a good chair, but he's not the chair now. And finally, on page 14, under number 1, I think the finding should be the lack of a loading dock will not have an adverse impact. So those are my corrections. And with that, I'll second the,
I don't have a motion yet, so if there's a motion,
I'll move to approve the minutes as corrected.
moved by Lindwall. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Westerberg. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I actually will be abstaining because I was not at that meeting. So my guess is that makes it 7-0-1, and the minutes are approved with those changes that were added in. With that, we will move into the main part of our agenda. Again, reiterating that we are not hearing the first case. So we'll move on to the second case, a special use for a planned development at 1621-31 Chicago Avenue. Ms. Ashball, would you like to read that into the record, please?
Yes, this case is case number 22 PLND-0102. Jeffrey Michael of Horizon Realty Group, applicant, requests a special use for planned development to construct a 15-story, 160-foot tall from grade mixed-use building with approximately 7,200 square feet of ground floor commercial, 140 dwelling units, and 57 parking stalls within a 2-level parking garage in the D4 Downtown Transition District. The applicant also requests the following site development allowances as part of the planned development. 1, 100 dwelling units where no more than 54 are allowed per City Code Section 61154B. Number 2, a building height of 145 feet where no more than 105 feet is permitted, City Code Section 61158. Number 3, 57 on-site parking stalls where a minimum of 118 are required, City Code Section 61635, Table 16B. And finally, 8 compact 90-degree parking stalls with a depth of 15 feet where a minimum depth of 18 feet is required per City Code Section 61627, Table 16A. 40 of the 140 dwelling units are considered bonus units per City Code Section 6111A2, given that 10 of the first 100 units will serve as the required on-site affordable units per City Code Section 574A. The Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case, in accordance with City Code Section 6368.
Thank you. At this point, I will ask the applicant if they'd please step up to the lectern and introduce yourself.
Good evening, Chair Rogers and members of the Land Use Commission. My name is Graham Grady. I'm the attorney for the applicant. Jeff Michaels, who's the actual applicant, will speak momentarily. Following Mr. Michael, you will hear from Tim Kent of Papa George Hames, the project architect. He will be followed by Michael Worthman, KLOA, our traffic consultant, followed by Jonathan Perman of the Perman Group, and I will follow them to review the standards. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the applicant, Jeffrey Michael.
Good evening. Thank you, Graham. As Graham indicated, I'm Jeff Michael. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Realty Group, the developers and the proud owners of the Marion. We're happy to be back before you tonight, and we've been here before in September, as you recall, and we're excited to offer a brand-new design and plan for the property at 1621 Chicago Avenue, known as The Legacy. For those of you who are not present at the Land Use Commission hearing last September, I wanted to provide you with some background about who we are and why we're here and what has brought us here. Horizon Realty Group is a family-owned and operated development and management company started by my father, Danny, about 35 years ago. Over the course of those 35 years, we've acquired and renovated over 2,000 apartments throughout Chicago's neighborhoods. We've been fortunate enough to execute these developments without any public money, no TIF money, or other government incentives. We do it on our own. Our focus is on purchasing neglected properties in need of renovation and improvement. We have followed this model for many years, which eventually led us here to Evanston, and more specifically to the Marion. We purchased what was formerly called the North Shore Retirement Hotel back in 2012 from the prior owners. The property was sorely neglected for several decades. While it may not have shown from the outside, from the inside it was an atrocity and provided very poor living conditions for Evanston seniors. When we first toured the site, we knew that we had to restore it to its original glory. What transpired thereafter was an infusion of over $40 million of our own money, with a focus on building and providing luxury senior living for local Evanstonians. The Marion speaks for itself, and like with all of our projects, it's been a labor of love. Today, the Marion is home to about 150 seniors and plays host to local brides and grooms, mitzvahs, weddings, serves the most amazing meals, provides unmatched services, and will remain a permanent fixture not only in the Evanston community, but in our family. It has been home to a variety of small independent retailers and restaurants who have been proud to have it as our commercial tenants there. What I would like to make sure you all understand is our commitment to every neighborhood where we own properties. We're long-term holders. We're committed to and invest in the neighborhoods in which we own our properties. We're not speculators, we're not institutional owners or buyers, but rather members and contributors to our community. You only need to walk by the Marion to see that for yourself, which leads me to why we're here tonight. We have a vision for this block of Chicago Avenue, and it doesn't start with the Marion, okay? But it begins with the Marion, I'm sorry. In addition to the Marion, we own the commercial retail properties immediately to the north of this property that sits on about 1/2 acre parcel with about 127 feet of frontage along Chicago Avenue. Our vision is to build a beautifully designed mixed-use residential building. It'll change the appearance of this block for the better and provide a level of living experience and services that does not exist in Evanston. This building will complete the 1600 block of Chicago Avenue, complement the Marion, the Park Evanston, and the rest of the urban street. The objective of this is to provide a much-desired living option and rental product that is not offered in Evanston right now. The building is going to be called The Legacy. As you know, we've gone through several iterations of the building design, and each time we've learned a lot from the constructive criticism that we received, as well as the adoration that many have also shared on the project. Tonight, we're unveiling a new design which directly responds to the thoughtful suggestions made by you guys on the Land Use Commission, staff, neighborhood, and other community stakeholders. We've made substantial adjustments to assuage several concerns. They are a reduction in the bulk, size, and density in the FAR. The FAR is down 19% from last time I was here, and we have 22% fewer units from the last time I was here. The building is 30 feet shorter, went from 195 feet down to 165 feet. We will increase the number of affordable units of market rate buildings in Evanston by 12%. We will increase the number of affordable units in market rate buildings in downtown Evanston by 24%. We added warmth with masonry at the ground level to better fit the streetscape and the surroundings of the building. And we are proposing an enhanced package of public benefits that includes alley reconstruction, apprenticeships, scholarships for students, and hiring opportunities for Evanston residents to be enforced by way of a workforce development agreement. As my team will show you in further detail, our proposal now aligns with the parameters of the zoning code and the D4 zoning district, while also meeting all the PD design standards. While it is acknowledged that 4 site development allowances are being requested, we believe that with the contribution of the meaningful on-site affordable housing in Evanston's most desirable area, along with the healthy offering of public benefits and the overwhelming economic infusion that the Legacy project presents, it clearly merits this accommodation. With that, I'd like to introduce my talented team here, who will further outline the proposed project, and Tim Kent is our architect with Papa George Hames.
Thank you, Jeff. Is this, how do I skip that? You're going to have to use your imagination. Roll, click. Okay. Hi, I'm Tim Kent with Papa George James Architects in Chicago. I'm skipping ahead some of the slides that were already covered by Jeff. So briefly, to reiterate some of the development allowances that are being requested here, we have, in terms of height, 105 feet is allowed under the zoning ordinance. We're asking for a 40-foot site development allowance for 145 feet. The building, the tape measure height of the building will be 165 feet, but 20 feet of that doesn't count towards the height because it's used for a parking garage. Previously, we were asking for a building 195 feet tall, so we're 30 feet shorter than we were before. We're asking, we have 57 parking spaces in the project, and 118 are required. That's primarily because the retail use that is assumed that will be here, if it's restaurant use, the worst case scenario in terms of parking load would require an additional number of spaces. However, we know that there's no parking there today, and there aren't any parking issues on site today. But we're requesting 57 spaces, 118 are required by the zoning ordinance. I just wanted to show quickly a series of diagrams that show where the site is. This is mid-block on Chicago Avenue. The Marion is to the right. And the zoning ordinance allows a building of this height. The black dashed line is the 105-foot base height that's allowed under zoning. However, the zoning ordinance permits us to request additional height up to 40 feet as a development allowance. 40 feet doesn't count, would not count for if it's for parking. We're only really using 20 feet of that because we have 2 levels of parking. So this was our previous design that we proposed last September when we were here. We had a total height of 195 feet, a street wall height of 185 feet. The design today has been substantially reduced. It's 14 full floors with a half floor making the 15th floor. The street wall height would be at 153, and then at the center volume, which contains mechanical space and amenity space, would be at 165. And we can see the building now in the context of the downtown skyline. And we see in blue the proposed Legacy looking from the east toward the west. And the building does make a significant transition going from the core of the skyline of Evanston across the street and stepping down towards the residential neighborhood that is to the east. The building is a contemporary glass volume that is turned perpendicular to Chicago Avenue. It's sculpted in a way with a curve in the glass at the corner to give it some visual interest. Balconies are incorporated and recessed into the volume of the glass so that they don't protrude. The glass itself has a subtle pattern as it goes up to provide additional visual interest. And it's intended to be a very clean and elegant addition, almost a background building in the way it's expressed. As the building reaches the ground, We pay very close attention to the pedestrian characters of Chicago Avenue that are existing today with a carefully defined rhythm that is at the appropriate scale for pedestrian use. This gray volume here is now brick. Previously, it was all a prefabricated concrete panel. So we're using that same material as an accent, but it's primarily brick, which is in keeping with the texture and the character of Chicago Avenue as it exists today. And we're breaking up the volume of the building as it reaches the ground and celebrating the entry to the residential part of it as well. And then we see the building also from the northwest. And note that the building is set back from this edge here, which is at the property line, by 15 feet. And it's set back so that we can have the proper amount of glazing on that whole wall. It also gives the building a much more slender appearance as it rises above the podium that it sits on. This is a close-up view of the sidewalk. We're anticipating a very activated use, a very complementary experience to everything that's going on not only in downtown Evanston, but as we would expect to see in an active downtown urban experience. There could be outdoor dining if we have a restaurant or that type of use here. And then we have a canopy that would mark the entrance for the residential use, and then additional retail space on the opposite side of that. You may remember that the original design had a curb cut and a porte cochere. That has all been moved to the back and is now off the alley. So the bike lane is protected, and then we will have a loading zone that's parked in front. I have a plan that will show that in a second. For 30-minute loading zone so that cars don't block this area and we can allow loading and drop-offs to occur in a protected area that's in the front of the building. Additionally, it's not shown in this rendering, but there will be some bike racks that will be located here and then over on the other side of where this car is. So we want this to feel very welcoming, and we think that the scale and the rhythm and the character is done in a contemporary way, but is appropriate to any activated pedestrian urban experience. And then these are the materials where we have pre-finished window wall, fiber cement panel, but primarily it's brick at the base of the building and some metal panels, and then sack finish concrete that would be used on the exposed concrete columns that are expressed here that also break up this volume into smaller subsections so that the grain of the street is maintained. Very quickly, just to go through the plans. This is a site plan. The entrance, again, Chicago Avenue is on the left here. The residential parking entrance is here. And then the loading, we have 2 loading bays, which is required. We're required to have 2, and we've provided 2. This is the ground floor plan. I'll be coming back to this plan in a minute, and our parking consultant, Michael Worthman, will be speaking to this. But we have 2 loading berths here. The residential driving entrance, vehicular entrance will be again off the alley here, lobby, and then we have about 7,200 square feet of retail or potentially restaurant use that's here. The amount of retail that's in on the property is actually reduced from what's there today. And then back of house and access. And then we have parking floors, 2 levels of parking. And then typical residential floors. This is the first floor above the podium. There will be some space used by the residents there. And then typical floor, the building is comprised, the units are studios, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. The uppermost level, the residential level, are larger penthouse units. And then at the very top floor, this is that half floor, the 15th floor, is a mixture of amenity. There will be a pool, a dog run, other amenity space, and then mechanical space. And then we have data to support all this. 140 total units, 10 affordable. And then this is a site plan showing the tree spacing that would be proposed. This would follow the City of Evanston standards for sidewalks, streets and sidewalks. These are the loading zones. There would be 30-minute parking stalls that would be controlled by the Park Evanston app. They're here. This is a fire hydrant access that's existing with the fire hydrants that's there today that will be maintained. And then we have bike racks here, for public bike racks here and here. And then the entrance from this area through to this, which is leading to the front door. And then we've also identified zones that could be used for sidewalk dining in the future, should that use be brought here. And the city asked us to demonstrate that there would still be proper clearance around that if you were to fence off those areas, which is typical for an outdoor dining, any sidewalk dining that we typically see. And then I'm going to go back to first floor slide, and turn it over to Michael.
Before you step away, I just have one quick question for you. You said, since you're on this slide, there was a percentage of retail decrease. What is that roughly? Do you know?
It's about 50%. There's roughly 15,000 square feet of retail on the site today, and this is just under 7,200. So a little bit more than half.
I also had a question. You said that on the north side, the setback had something to do with the glazing on that side. What is that about?
Sure. This line is the property line, and that's called an interior lot line. And you're not allowed to have windows against an interior property line. So we're setting the windows or the face of the building back 15 feet. And that will allow us to have 75% of that window wall be fully glazed. And that's a building code rule. If I go back to the perspective view, sorry, going the wrong way. There are sections here that are spandrel, meaning that they're solid. They're still glazed, that it will all match, but they're not actually glazed. This portion, which is right at the property line, we wouldn't be able to have any windows in that at all. That's just part of that's a fire codes rule.
While you're with the perspectives, if you could go back one more, I had a question about, there appears to be a planter and a canopy, and yes, that one. Is the planter within the property line, or does that extend to beyond the property line? And similarly, is the canopy project past the property line?
The canopy would definitely project beyond the property line, as we would typically see in any canopy like this. That's when the building is on the zero lot line. The planter is, it may be, actually, I think it's just in the rendering, but it's not in the plan. So we'd have to look at that. Actually, no, I take that
Yeah,
back. It's right here, and it's within the property line.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the canopy would not be.
The canopy would project out over. Any other questions before?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
can you go back to the picture where you had the other buildings in the close vicinity and the heights listed for those? Yep, Ford.
This one?
Those are all actual heights, right?
Those are
Not-
actual heights.
Not zoning heights.
Those are actual heights.
Actual heights. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Good evening. Good to see everybody again. My name is Michael Worthman. I'm a principal with the firm of KLOA, offices at 9575 West Higgins Road in Rosemont. I am a licensed professional engineer and a certified professional traffic operations engineer. We were retained to conduct a traffic study for the proposed development, and I will give you a brief summary of the findings of the traffic study. As you've heard, the development's going to consist of 140 units. Of that, about 68% of the units will be studios or one bedroom, and about 32% will be two bedrooms, no three bedrooms. So it's predominantly studios and one bedrooms. As we just talked about, there'll be 7,200 square feet of commercial space, which is about a 50%, over 50% reduction to the current commercial space at the site. And there'll be a total of 57 parking spaces. A little bit on the traffic study. The traffic study was performed based on the methodology within the industry, and more importantly, with the based on what the transportation agencies require, including IDOT, Cook County, and the city of Evanston. We used all the current manuals and software that are available when performing this study. So we used all the latest criteria when performing the study. And the methodology is the same that we use in all of our study, particularly in urban areas like Evanston, City of Chicago, Village of Oak Park. One thing about the development, which is very important, is it is considered a transit-oriented development for several reasons. One is its location within downtown Evanston and its proximity to all the businesses and the amenities, which are all within walking distance, or many of them are in walking distance of the site. And two is the robust public transportation serving the area. You got the Davis Street L, you got the Davis Street Metro, you got 3 or 4 bus routes, you got divvy stations, car sharing stations, and you got the Chicago Bike Lane, all within a quarter mile to 3/10 of a mile, or about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the area, from the site. Furthermore, Evanston considers this area a transit-oriented development. That is significant when you look at the volume of traffic that's going to be generated by this development. The fact that it is a transit-oriented development significantly reduces the reliance of residents on private automobiles. This is evident in the fact that census data for a 1/2 mile radius from the Davis Street station shows that over 50% of the residents actually commute by some other form of transportation than the private automobile. So about 50% of the residents in that area commute via public transportation, alternative modes of transportation, walk, those sort of things. So only about 50% of the residents actually drive. And once again, this is based on specific census data in this area, 1/2 mile from that Davis Street station. As such, you can see that the volume of traffic to be generated by the development and its parking demand will be significantly reduced given this TOD characteristics. Further reducing the traffic to be generated by the development is the fact that the site currently has 15,000 square feet of commercial space and is currently generating traffic. We're going to reduce that in half. Another factor that will reduce the volume of traffic is the unit mix. As I indicated, 68% of the units are one-bedroom and studios. They're smaller units than the 2-bedroom and 3 bedrooms where you have more families, children, and so forth. So that's a significant factor in the volume of traffic and the parking demand that you have for these types of developments. As it pertains to access, as you can see here, access to the 57-space parking garage is going to be off the alley at the north end of the site. It will be a 2-way access drive, 1 inbound lane and 1 outbound lane. The reason that the access drive is on the alley is twofold. I'm sure, as you all know, it's preferred by the city of Evanston to have access on the alley to minimize any impact on the street system and, more importantly, on the sidewalk system. Evanston tries to minimize their access drives along the main streets. More importantly, the Chicago two-lane bike lane runs in front of the site, and Evanston will not allow us to break access at that location. So access will be off the alley, 57 spaces. In addition, loading to the two loading docks will be located off the alley. The loading docks have been designed in order to accommodate those trucks backing in and pulling out of the alley. The impact of the development of the access drives on the alley will be limited due to several reasons. One is the traffic volume show that the volume of traffic on the alley is very low. I think it serves about 30 parking spaces along the alley. So it's a low volume of traffic. Second is the fact that that the intersections of the alley with Davis Street and Church Street have more than sufficient capacity to accommodate the additional traffic that will be generated by the facility. Third is the fact that the commercial deliveries on the alley will be significantly reduced, given that the amount of commercial space is going to be reduced in half. Fourth is the fact that the proposed development is going to provide two loading docks. Currently, there isn't any loading docks in the alley, so we're providing loading docks to pull that deliveries off of the alley and into the loading docks. The other is that the alley does provide for two-way circulation, which helps to distribute the traffic along the alley and, more importantly, along the street system, because traffic can now exit on or enter from either Davis Street or Church Street. More importantly, the developer has committed to implementing a alley management plan to ensure that the alley is operating sufficiently. And second, the developer is committing to improve the alley over its existing condition. Drop-off and pickup activity and quick deliveries, your Uber Eats and so forth, will occur within the front of the building via the 3 parking spaces in front of the building. Those will be dedicated as short-term 30-minute parking spaces. We've worked with the city of Evanston, and they feel that's the most appropriate way to address that concern. So 3 of the spaces right in front will be 30-minute parking spaces, so there'll be high turnover parking spaces to accommodate pickup and drop-off and Uber Eats and the like. Once again, the impact on these deliveries and drop-off and pickup activity will be reduced, one, for the fact that we have 2 loading docks in the back of the building, so those longer-term deliveries, FedEx, Amazon, can park in the back, take their time to deliver those packages. Second is the fact that we will have those 3 short-term parking spaces in the front of the building. The building will also have a doorman, which is important, in the fact that when there's an Uber Eats delivery, they can drop it off to the doorman. They don't have to wait for the resident to come down, so that will speed up the deliveries of these food deliveries. And second, the doorman can keep an eye on those 3 spaces, make sure no one's double parking, no one's sitting there longer than 30 minutes. Lastly, the measures that are being done here are similar, if not more, than what you would find at any other residential development that you have within the city of Evanston. So we're really going out of our way to try to minimize those deliveries and drop-off and pickup activity. Quickly, I'm almost done. Just wanted to indicate the traffic study that we did provides for a very worst-case analysis. We assumed all new traffic to be generated by the development. We did not take any discounts for the commercial development that's already there and that's generating traffic. Second is, per the request of Evanston, the traffic study includes the traffic to be generated by 9 additional developments within the area. So we looked at those 9 additional developments and added that traffic to the roadway system, street system, as well as using an ambient growth factor just to account for any additional growth in the area. What we found out is that in general, the intersections, the roadways within the study area do have sufficient reserve capacity to accommodate the traffic that will be generated by the development. As we all know, there is some queuing and additional delay that happens at some of these intersections, particularly northbound or southbound, on Chicago Avenue. This is typically for about a half an hour period that we find in the afternoon. And the queues typically dissipate pretty quickly. More importantly, the volume of traffic that we're adding to these intersections is very low. It's less than a 1% increase in traffic at any of the intersections. As such, other than the improvements to the alley, no additional improvements are required on the roadway system to accommodate the traffic that will be generated by the development. I will be here for any questions that you have, or if you have any,
I have a
let me know.
question. Could
Yeah.
you elaborate? I know it's in our brochure and I read it, but could you elaborate on the alley improvements?
I don't want to misspeak.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Let me go back to a slide here. Okay, it rolls. What's going to be the best one to show that? I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, this is probably good. Of course, now in hindsight, we don't have the Grady drawing.
Part of my question is
Yeah.
the extent. You
Yes.
know,
So the public benefits and the improvements to the alley comes in 2 components. One, who pays for the improvements, and secondly, the alley management plan. On the first part, the plan is for the entire alley between the 2 streets to be improved. The applicant will pay 100% for the 127 linear feet from behind the building all the way across to the other side of the alley. In addition, the Marion will pay for the area from the Legacy to the corner to the center of the alley. So that leaves a couple of other areas. The area behind the Marion that's on the opposite side of the alley, the applicant is going to contribute 50% to the cost of that, $200,000.
when you say the opposite side of the alley, you're saying the previous statement was about half the alley?
Yeah, I'm going to, forgive me, this is really, I think you'll understand it. Forgive me, we should have had this in the drawing. And just bear with me, I think you'll understand it. So if this is the alley from one street to the other, thank you. And this is the Legacy. The Legacy will pay for 100% of the pavement of the alley fully to the other side. The Marion is located here. The owner of the Marion, which happens to be the same party, will pay 100% of the half of the alley here.
Half of the
The applicant will contribute $200,000 towards the improvement of this portion, which is the other half opposite the Marion, and towards the improvement of the other end of the alley. Evanston has a 50-50 payment plan. This public benefit of $200,000 contribution by the applicant will reduce the burden for areas where the applicant has no obligation whatsoever to pay anything. And that's this area and this area. And so it's a $200,000 contribution by the applicant to help get the entire alley paved from one street.
Which seems like a lot to me, but I don't know what the cost of this would be. The point is after this project is done, is there enough money or an agreement between the applicant and Evanston to improve the whole alley?
George, if I can clarify. So Evanston has a 50/50 program. I think it's by way of a special assessment. You guys probably know more about the program. To clarify, we're going to commit to fixing the 127 feet that are directly behind our property. We're also committing to contribute the first $200,000 towards Evanston's share of that 50/50 program. So let's say it's another $200,000, or let's say it's $300,000 to fix the rest of the alley. My 200 goes towards whatever Evanston's share would be, goes in Evanston's coffers. Because the 50/50 program is shared by all the adjoining neighbors. So it's public benefit directly to Evanston.
So just to clarify, the $200,000 is really just the city's, it's a contribution to the city's portion of the alley
Correct.
improvement. So
Correct.
you'll be paying your, whatever the assessment for the Marion property plus,
Evanston's share. I kick in the first $200,000 for Evanston's share.
no,
Whoever-
but I mean, there will be a share for the 50/50 program. The Marion would have a share for its half of the alley.
Yeah, that's above and beyond.
That's,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Because it's not really terribly clear the way the alley improvement, with that section is
I think
written.
the simple way to think about it, whatever Evanston's tab would be in that 50/50 program, we're going to pick up the first $200,000
Okay.
of your tab.
So then presumably the other adjacent property owners would have whatever their share would be.
Correct.
The applicant is paying for approximately 75% of the alley from one end to the other. So we're paying 100% of what we have to pay. That's not in the 200,000.
Okay,
The 200,000 is
that's
on top.
not entirely clear the way this is written right now.
Well, that's why we appreciate the dialogue
That's
we're able to
why I
have
asked
this
the
evening.
question. I read it and I didn't really understand.
The other part I wanted to mention with regard to the alley, as it relates to the alley management plan, and this is just as good a time as any to talk about it. The alley right now is an unmitigated mess. And a big part of the reason it's a mess is that the 6 individual tenants in this building frequently park behind the buildings laterally. They have individual dumpsters for their businesses. Some of those dumpsters are not perfectly aligned and perpendicular or in plane. When this building is built, 100% of those dumpsters behind those 6 businesses will go away. Secondly, 100% of the alley parking behind those 6 businesses will go away. All of the parking that currently exists behind those 6 businesses now goes away. All of our parking is indoors. All of our loading is indoors. All of our trash is indoors. So there's a terrible misperception that this project is going to contribute to the mess. It's going to clean up the mess. Secondly, people hear 57 cars, 57 cars, 57 cars. A lot of people work from home. People don't all leave or come home at the same time. 57 cars coming and going, even with rush hour scenarios, it's in dribs and drabs. So we're hopeful that the Land Use Commission members recognize the improvement to the alley that this project will bring with the elimination of all those dumpsters, with the elimination of all those cars. I was out there one day, there was a motorcycle parked behind one of the businesses and a car parked out of that motorcycle, blocking half the alley. All that goes away. This is a great improvement for the alley, both in terms of its physical paving as well as the manner in which it's used.
Yes, and I guess what I'm looking for is that if this project is built, will the entire alley be improved with funding from you guys and from the city and whomever else? Because it would be awful if it wasn't, if the project was built and then there was these arguments forever, ever and ever. So,
It is, yeah, please.
That's out of our control because that will be dependent upon if the 50/50 program is voted upon, I guess,
and
whatever
so,
procedure.
and I don't
then
even know
yes.
if staff can answer that question, but that would be the,
Right.
It's our hope, and we will advocate for it. We will absolutely advocate for it. And there's enough time to plan for it as well.
While we're talking about the alley, one quick question. How wide is the alley? Is it a 16-foot, 20-foot, 18?
20?
20?
20.
Okay.
Something said 18. 20. Okay.
Terrific. Are there any other questions for Mr. Worthman from KLOA regarding
I do
the,
have a few questions.
Please.
Just kind of understand as you look at this type of a building and try to evaluate how much parking you need and how it impacts everything. Did you take a look at any of the other new senior living facilities that have gone up in Evanston? I think there's the Apador and the Truly, to get some sense of how many spaces there are really used by residents?
We have not, per se. I can tell you there's been a big study done in the city of Chicago, in the downtown area, where they say right now that a unit is using about one-third space, or about 0.33 parking spaces per unit. I believe we're at 0.401, I believe it is, spaces per unit. What contributes to the low parking demand is that TOD. More importantly, it's the unit mix. You know, you don't have as many 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. There's been studies that show that one in studio and 1 bedroom apartments, parking demand is significantly lower than those with 2 or 3 bedrooms. And that's because you get more families, you got kids, you need 2 cars, where if you're in a studio 1 bedroom, you usually got a millennial or an empty nester where they may have 1 car or no car at all, particularly the millennial.
Thank you. No, but this is for seniors, so I guess
No, it's not for seniors.
Not, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. So this is simply adults?
Market rate.
Market rate, all right. In terms of, deliveries, drop-offs, how do you try to assess for visitors coming in to see folks, whether they're friends, family, et cetera? Right now, you're not going to have parking for visitors per se, correct? The parking is reserved for residents, as I recall.
Correct. So they will either park on street, or there's a city garage, 500 feet to the north of us that they can use when they come to visit or if they stay overnight.
So that can be, I suppose, an issue for neighbors, obviously, in terms of where those cars do end up parking. How about for the retail? You do not have any parking for the retail, is that correct?
Yeah, so Commissioner Jonathan Perman here. We must clarify, we at the city's strong recommendation have committed to lease 23 spaces, up to 23 spaces in the Church Chicago parking garage that could be used for a variety of purposes, whether that's visitors, whether that's restaurant patrons, or additional needs that residents have or employees. The public parking garages in Evanston are running currently at about 50% capacity, so there's more than enough room for us to be able to use some of those spaces, which are just a block away.
So how would that sort of work from an operational basis in terms of being able to send visitors to the parking garage, or just make sure that there isn't a buildup of traffic outside in front?
City staff has recommended that we could do a validation system. We haven't delved into the details of that, but I think that would solve that problem.
Okay.
Tenants can be given validation cards that they can hand out to their guests, or stickers.
As long as we're talking about parking, maybe this is the time to talk about this .41 ratio, which I understand from reading that this is a ratio that has been applied to other projects, and some of those projects even have come back to us. Just tell me if I'm wrong. Come back to us and say, hey, even that ratio we can't fill. We have plenty of empty spaces. So they've asked us to even reduce, if they could even reduce it. So could you elaborate on that?
Yes, that is correct. The most recent development that came before the commission and the city council to request a planned development adjustment to reduce the number of stalls that was required to be leased was 1571 Maple. So they did have to provide evidence that they were not leasing the spaces, but it was found to be clear that they did not need them.
Less than the .4.
The ratio, I do not recall. I'll defer to Megan Jones. She was the staff lead for that project.
I'm questioning this .41.
Yeah, I can look it up to see what the exact number is, but they had already received a reduction that was essentially 50% of what they needed. and then a further reduction that was essentially matching what they were using. So I do believe it was less than that 0.41%. But I can look at the
I
exact
remember
number.
this generally, I just didn't remember the numbers.
One more question here on the routing the parking through the alley. I understand why the city does not like curb cuts and some of the problems with safety that those can incur. Is there any concern, though, about having increased traffic through that alley until it is completely improved, number one? And second, in terms of the fact that you have a church and a child care center there, and you're trying to make sure that that alley is safe. I get the concept behind not having a curb cut, but I'm a little concerned that, we are pushing more traffic through an area that's already pretty constrained.
That's a great question, Commissioner. So Public Works staff did review this, and they did not raise any issues or concerns. They were comfortable with the petitioner contributing to improving the alley. With regard to additional traffic to that area, with the traffic, we presume would be limited to the loading only for move-ins, moves out, which the building management would be responsible for scheduling. And then, of course, also any inventory deliveries for prospective retail or restaurant tenants. And we believe the most frequent use would then be the pickup and drop-off, which would be the point of the 30-minute parking stalls. They had initially proposed to just block it off, but we talked with the parking division and Public Works, and we feel that the parking, to reduce the maximum permitted amount of time you can park there to 30 minutes, will encourage turnover. People that are there for 2 to 5 minutes waiting for someone to come out of the building to ride, that should be sufficient. So staff was not concerned with any increased traffic to the alley.
Commissioner, I think it's also important to remember that when we first brought this project to the city and to the then Plan Commission, our plan was to have a porte cochere concept with a curb cut, and that, quite frankly, was roundly rejected by city staff and by the community. And so, given that, we accepted that change. We thought it was an artful and creative way to handle the traffic, but that really pushed the entry to the garage to the back, to the alley, and that's why we're there at this point.
No, and I do remember that. I actually like that, by the way.
We did too.
But I understand the challenges. I guess my question to staff is whether, long-term, as we look at these developments and as we continue to see them proposed, whether it does make sense to make sure we incorporate drop-offs, loading, and things like that within their property as opposed to pushing it up to the street.
Long-term, I think that would be a great policy direction that we could hopefully come to a consensus on, not just with this particular project, but within the whole downtown and other areas. I think with this particular location, with it being mid-block, the city staff was more concerned about preserving the protected bike lane and making sure that that was preserved. That was staff's opinion, and both Public Works and community development were in agreement on that.
Since we're talking parking, I just wanted to confirm that the on-site parking is just for the residential and that all the commercial parking that would be required would be leased. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Worthman? If not, it's our pleasure to introduce Jonathan Perman.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers, Chairman Rogers, and Commission. I just wanted to take a 30-second point of personal privilege and thank the city's planning and development staff, Katie, Sarah, Elizabeth, Megan. They have been responsive, they have been helpful, and we really appreciate their creative insights and what they have offered to us over the last few years. So thank you so much. You don't get enough credit, and we really appreciate it. I wanted to talk a little bit about history and context. A history professor once told me that you can't understand the present unless you understand the background and the history and the context. And so to bring some context to this project, I want to offer a couple points. First, the marketplace itself that we're operating in and that we're choosing to invest in. The population of Evanston, as I've mentioned before, but it continues, is much less today than it was in the 1970s and 80s. Evanston has not grown in terms of the number of people, and thus there is plenty of room for people to move into Evanston, and there is a great demand for people to come to Evanston. The population of Evanston is about 77,500. In 1970, it was about 80,000 people. So it continues not able to meet or get to the level that it once was 50-some years ago. However, to answer the question of why that is, it's a really simple reason, and that is that households today are much smaller than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. So while we have less people in Evanston, we indeed have more households. We also have right now, in terms of the market conditions, a housing supply shortage. This is not just Evanston, this is the United States of America right now, a serious housing shortage at all price points. The U.S. needs to build, according to the National Multifamily Housing Council, every year from here on out, for the next 10 years, 328,000 new apartments every year just to keep up with the demand. The demand is because of a number of things, not the least of which is the pandemic that forced long-term changes and challenges to downtowns like Evanston. People took a hiatus for a few years and didn't make housing moves or decisions. They are now. There is still a pandemic. We have learned to live with it. But now we are seeing people coming out of their homes, so to speak, and looking for other housing opportunities, and that's one of the drivers of demand. A second driver, of course, is interest rates, which has lessened the appetite for housing purchases and increased the demand for apartments. There's less demand for office space, obviously, with the advent of remote working, which means less demand for daytime eating and shopping. There is a movement to rely more heavily in terms of contemplating one's downtown on residential living. We're seeing that in Chicago. And so to be successful with this strategy, you need density in the downtown to create the demand for diners and shoppers, and Evanston is positioned well. However, we have in downtown some of the most expensive land in this community, and that requires greater densities and heights to make multifamily housing succeed. By the way, on the commercial side, I will tell you that if there was ever a landlord that championed small independent businesses rather than chains and has a 10-year track record in Evanston to prove it, it would be HRG. Interestingly, one of the stabilizing factors that Evanston has is the presence of Northwestern University. It is by far the largest employer, and with over 10,000 undergraduate and graduate students in Evanston and over $1 billion in annual research awards, it is a fortunate demand generator for Evanston, and it continues to grow. And yes, and I will say this, some of the tenants of the legacy will be students and faculty, some of whom will start businesses in Evanston and form long-term commercial and residential relationships with our local economy. But to prove our point in terms of demand even further, the city staff asked us to redo our market study where we had hired Integra Realty Resources to do a marketing report. A couple highlights that they brought in their report, and which is in your packet. The lease up to stabilization is a very quick one, expected of 10 to 15 units a month and completed in less than 1 year. The suburban market, as we stand here today, is full. Full means it's at 97.5% occupancy. The result is that Evanston needs more rental apartments of all types as the market is full. Integra believes the location is stellar. It's an excellent case and place for high-density development, and there's low parking demand since many renters will not own a car. On affordable housing, there continues to be a mistaken perception that new luxury apartments in Evanston are somehow forcing out long-term residents with gentrification. Nothing could be further than the truth when it comes to this project. And that's because we are not displacing anyone. We are adding 140 units of housing and a net gain of approximately 213 residents. Finally, there are inherent high costs of land in an inner ring community on Lake Michigan like Evanston. And if you couple that with what is relatively little land in Evanston that can be used for multifamily housing, because most of Evanston is zoned geographically R1 and R2, in effect, Evanston itself, and I'm not casting blame here, this is just reality, has actually zoned itself out of easily accommodating housing at scale, which is generally needed for affordability. So this project, through the IHO that we're complying with, offers some progress towards Evanston's goal of making itself a little more affordable. On parking, one other point, and that's connected to the environment and Evanston's ambitions to be a green city. There's a very high penalty that we pay as a community for adding more parking stalls, which cost $25,000 to $40,000 a piece, more than the cost of a car itself. And that adds to the cost of the rental price when you look at the total cost of the building. So over parking, or building too much parking, is actually a really big deal, and it especially hurts us in the context of wanting to be a transit-oriented development city. So parking stalls are expensive, they require extra land, they're expensive to build, and they increase the cost, which then reduces the availability of affordable housing. You see how that's all connected? So downtown Evanston has an abundance of public parking, as I mentioned earlier. And we need, just from an economic standpoint, to try to fill those public parking garages, because Evanston is shouldering the expensive capital costs that it pays regardless of how many cars are in those garages. So for a community that harbors ambitions to be a model green community, let's stop building more parking spaces, which are wasteful of precious land resources. Two more points that I'd like to make. One is we provided you with a fiscal economic impact analysis. I won't go into the details of it, but let me tell you why it's important. It's important that this project will provide on a net present value, and when we take into account the public costs of another 213 residents, so the cost per pupil cost for schools, that there will be a few students that are generated, and the public cost for serving these new residents, when you take that into effect and run a net present value over the 13-year study period that we looked at, 2023 to 35, it's worth $8 million of new revenue for this community. That's significant. That's important because while the school districts are in a strong position with respect to funding their pension liabilities, the city of Evanston's pension liabilities are about 65% funded according to the Cook County Treasurer's report of 2022. That does not make it one of the most challenged taxing bodies in Cook County, but it is a challenge for this community. And unless Evanston's tax base continues to grow and meet the growth in public employee retirement benefits, then Evanston will be saddled with only one other option. That's two options, either cut services or raise property taxes or other taxes even higher. So this project provides a strong opportunity for Evanston to add to its tax base. Lastly, the context of precedent. And let me shoot to here. This is a graph, and if you want to see it up close, because I know that that's hard to read, we've actually and while I'm at it, look it on the screen or there. There are some that feel that there is a proverbial line in the pavement on Chicago Avenue suggesting that height and density somehow cannot exist east of the center of that north-south corridor of Chicago Avenue. Yet, that line was breached, if you will, many years ago. Not on Chicago Avenue. It wasn't breached. It was breached one block east on Hinman Avenue, where the Mather built two fine senior residences at 141 feet, which is about 24 feet less than what we're asking for. And yes, there was shouting and there was crying in 2009 about the encroachment on the residential neighborhood, but few would suggest today that the Mather is a detriment with its two buildings to the neighborhood of Hinman Avenue. Similarly, when the 500 Davis building was built in 1978 at 135 feet in a D1 zone, which was 221% above what was permitted, there was opposition. But did it result in high traffic volumes, lower home values, or a lesser quality of life? I don't think so. The variances that we are asking for from the zoning code are much, much less than what this body and what the city council and bodies, your predecessors, than what has been granted in the past. And the relief that we're asking for regarding dwelling units and parking, again, is quite comparable to other recently approved developments which have enhanced downtown Evanston. One example, in another part of the D4 zone, is Optima Horizons in 2005, which was granted a 12% increase above what was permitted in terms of height. So there's a list of the tallest buildings in Evanston. You can see where the legacy would be. It's another look at it. So we would become I believe it's the 13th tallest building in Evanston. I believe there's 12 taller buildings, some much, much taller to the left of the blue. And this shows you where we stand in terms of our request compared to other developments that have been approved by the city of Evanston. What we're asking for is a variance above what is permitted in terms of height of 14%. 14% above what is permitted, above the 105 plus the 40 that we are granted, that we can ask for in terms of a development allowance. Many other projects have been granted variances of 40, 50, 111%, 178%, 221%, you see there. So I just wanted to give you the context that we think this project stands on its own 2 feet, but looking at how Evanston has ruled on other similar kinds of requests that were actually much greater, those were granted, and we hope that by our requests coming down significantly from where we were 2-3 years ago, that you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
So, Mr. Perman,
Yes.
just a question or a comment.
Sure.
Of the buildings that are on this list, most of them are west of Chicago Avenue, or at least on the west side. The two that are not are 500 Davis and the Mather. And I actually asked staff to check on the height of the Mather. The height of the Mather is actually, for the north building, about 117 feet. The south building is about 107. The only thing that is at the 141-foot level is the cupola that's on top
Right.
of the Mather. So that's another 34 feet. But that is not the full height of the building at all. The height of the building is about 11 stories. So I think we should just clarify that for everyone.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And I guess you would look at it the same way with our building, that we essentially, our 15th floor is a half floor.
If you put a cupola up there, it'll be great.
Oh, is that it? We just have to round it off, huh?
I also have a
Thank you for
question.
that clarification, Commissioner.
I also have a clarification
Yes,
question
sure.
to ask. First of all, I was actually very surprised when I looked at my property tax bill and discovered that the District 65 is only funding, I think, 35 or 39% of its pension obligations at the moment, which surprised me.
It's surprising.
But also, when we're calculating you're doing your fiscal impact analysis, you were basically assuming that the property taxes that this building would pay would be net new taxes? or not?
Yes.
I mean, they're.
No, well, no, we took into account the current taxes
Right.
that are being paid, which are pretty nominal in comparison. So the property right now is paying this year $110,000.
Yeah, But.
So it's the net.
Yeah, but as I'm, I know you know because of some of your other analysis, which I've read, the way property taxes are calculated, the new assessed value gets put into the base, and then the property tax rate, is calculated and distributed among all of the other properties. So I think I just want to make the point that while a new building would pay significant amounts of property taxes, it also would mean that other property owners would pay a penny or two less, just the way the property tax is calculated, so.
So we're adding to the total EAV of the
Yes.
community. Right.
Yes.
No, that's a good point.
So it's kind of, it tends to kind of skew the results. There are certainly states that if you build something new,
Yeah.
it adds to the property tax base, the property taxes. But in Illinois, that's not the case.
Right.
So I think it's just important to,
But I
include
think
that
you.
in the analysis,
Right,
which
but I
I'm
think
sure
that
you
you'd
have.
agree that one of Evanston's, actually, it's one of its stated goals, is to try to increase that EAV.
Well, increasing the EAV is terrific, because
yeah.
it spreads the tax burden
Right.
among more properties.
Exactly.
But, given the fact that Evanston's tax base, the last time I looked, was over $2 billion, a new development, even of this scale, is not going to really appreciably change anybody's tax bill.
No, and I wasn't suggesting the taxes would go down because of that, but but addition is better than subtraction.
Yes.
I have a couple questions on the IHO.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 10 affordable units in the building. Our ratio that I've gotten is 68% studio, one bedroom, 32% two and three bedroom. Is that correct?
Yeah, is that the number? I don't have it right in front of me, but.
I believe Mr. Worthman threw those numbers out for us.
I just can't see it. Sorry.
The ratio is 14% studio, 54% one bedroom, 32% two bedroom.
Okay, and there are no three bedrooms. Someone mentioned three bedroom earlier, but I didn't think there were any.
No, there are no three bedrooms.
Okay.
And then the IHO units would match that.
Right.
So 2, 5, 3, that equals 10.
Okay.
And they would be in the same ratio approximately as the body of the rest of the
Right,
units.
right, because that's the way we base it off of. What is the level of affordability for these units? What is the AMI that we're looking at?
60%.
Okay. Are there any other questions this
Yeah, I've got a
moment?
question for Mr. Michael. I think it would be yours. And I always ask this question. I think I know kind of how you're going to answer this because I know this is not finalized. But we've had several projects that we've approved, and they haven't been built. And the reason is financing. And so in this climate, and I know you probably don't have guaranteed financing, but being who you are, have you reached out to potential sources for financing, and how likely? In our packet, there's a schedule, which is aggressive, I think, but achievable. Is that going to happen, or are we going to be sitting here, year after year, and 'cause
So, yeah.
there is no financing?
Sure, and that's a good question. As I mentioned, we've funded and financed all 28 buildings that we've ever purchased and projects that we've done, and we anticipate doing the same with this project. We will go out and get a construction loan for probably about 65%, but the rest of the equity, the good thing about dealing with us is we don't have to go out and raise that equity. We did the same thing with the Marion off of our own balance sheet, and we intend to do the same with this project. But we've talked to lenders. They're ready to partner with us when this gets approved.
I have one more question. In the application, with respect to the retail space, it talked about between 2 and 6 units, for the retail, yes.
So
It's
for
only
retail.
two units, so
They're each
so
about
that's.
3,500 or 3,800
Right,
square feet.
because the application, indicated at one point 2 to 6, and I just was wondering if the intent was to break them into smaller spaces or to have 2 larger spaces. And then I guess for, the follow-up question for staff is, does that impact anything from the city's perspective?
We're not aware of the range, there being a range of tenant spaces. It is just the 2 that are depicted on the site plan. And in terms of parking, even if they were to split off and make one accessible from the interior of the lobby, it would be the same parking requirement. We did do the parking ratio based upon assuming it would be a type 1 restaurant prospectively.
Okay, so it is, I just was,
Yes.
looking from the zoning, and the original application versus what has been in the packet and the plans, and I just wanted
Gotcha.
to clarify.
Yes, this current application is 2 tenant spaces as shown on the floor plans. Mhm.
So presumably, if they wanted to divide one of those 2 spaces into, that would require coming back for,
No,
That would
there,
not
they would
require-
be, they would, if they were, as a listed use in the permitted administrative review
that would
or
just be
special.
a staff
yes,
function?
mhm.
Okay.
Yes, and if there were any additional building code regulations, because it's a different ingress, egress, that would be covered at that time.
Okay.
I have some questions. I'd like to go back to the height. Can you tell me again how you're calculating the 14% increase in height variance?
So we're taking the 105 feet that's the base permitted, the allowance, the development allowance that's available to us of 145 feet, which brings it to 145 feet. And then we're asking for 165 feet, so it's the 20 feet is 20 extra feet is 14% more of the 145.
What allowance are you talking about with 145?
Site development allowance.
You go here.
The base zoning height is 105, and with your discretion, you're allowed to provide another 40 feet?
Yeah.
40 feet on site development to take to 145.
The site development allowance, the request is an additional 40 feet, which is the maximum.
So you're not counting that 40 feet in the calculation of your request above the zoned permitted height?
That is the request.
No, yeah, I understand that's the request, but I'm questioning the 14%.
No, the other calculations were all done the same way. So in any one of the downtown districts, there's a base amount and there's a site development allowance. We took the amount that was granted over the last several years above the base plus the site development allowance.
And you calculated all those numbers
Yes, we did.
the same way?
Yep.
Okay, I have another question. What is it? I want to make sure that we're being clear that this is a D4 district, and there's a certain intent of the purpose of the D4, meaning that it's transitional between downtown and other uses. So I'd like to hear you explain how you understand the purpose of that being a transitional zoned area.
I think this graphic may focus on that one. Am I going the right way? So graphically, and I'll come back a little more directly, as you can see, and it was explained earlier. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I apologize. Thank you. So the legacy is proposed to be significantly shorter than the buildings that are across the street that are not in the transition zone. And as you can see, it's stepped down even further. The Mather is 141 feet, which is closer to the lake to the east, and the 500 Davis is.
Sir,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to correct you. The Mather is not 140 feet. There is a small portion of the building that's 140 feet, but just so you know, that's about 117 feet.
Thank you very much for that correction. But you see the concept. The further to the west the buildings are, the taller they are. We're in the transition zone, so we're about 60 feet, am I doing the math right? Shorter than the Park Evanston, directly across the street, 70 feet shorter than that. And so that is part of how we are honoring being in the transition zone. We're on the east side of Chicago Avenue. We're 70 feet shorter than the building directly across the street.
If I could add, I understand the spirit of your question. You're saying we're supposed to taper down. Is this tapering? And there is no definition of what taper is. All we have to go by is what the zoning code allows us to do, and there's a specific calculation. So we're tapering down. Are we maximizing in accordance with that zoning code allows? We are. But in our view, we're tapering down. You know, we could all debate all night what an appropriate taper level is, what that slope should be from across the street. That we can't answer for you. But we feel like we're appropriately tapering because we're adhering to what the code and what your discretion allows here.
Are we okay with what?
Just to clarify, and Commissioner Westerberg, I would appreciate your clarification about the Mather, but the Mather then was granted, if we use the same calculation, Commissioner Putel, a 20% increase in height over and above the 97.
The Mather is not even in the same zoning district, though.
No, it isn't.
So it's not, I don't know how relevant it is.
Well, it's in an R.
Yeah, it's an
zoning
art
district,
district, so
yeah.
it's a whole different conversation.
All right, in the interest of moving along, Mr. Grady, is there anything you'd like to?
Sorry,
go
so I
ahead.
did have one follow-up question.
Please.
So I am interested in the intent of the D4 district. And it says here in our packet that to meet that, it says the massing and the scale of structures within the D4 district should be reflective of established uses and should provide a suitable transition between downtown districts and those adjacent to the downtown. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's reflective of established uses. You're broadening the scope of the step down or the transition. But if you looked at more narrowly about established uses in the D4, I mean, I don't see a strong precedent for buildings of this height.
So, thank you for your question. The first, in terms of uses, all the uses that we're proposing are already existing in the D4. There's retail there, there's apartments, and that's what our uses are that are being proposed. So in terms of the uses, we're totally consistent with what's already there and in the D4. In terms of the height and the massing and the density, that is in fact the judgment call, and we believe we meet the standards for the developer allowance that's being requested. But that's why there's an LUC for you to make a judgment based upon our application and the totality of the public benefits and all the other components of our application.
Okay, thank you.
I would also suggest that if you're looking for a direct comparison in the D4, that you might look at Optima Horizons at Clark and Sherman, which is 162 feet in the D4, that was granted a 12% increase over over their development allowance.
I wanted to address your question because I wanted to make sure, you seem to be asking about the development allowance relative to the base zoning height. And the development allowance that we're requesting is within the bounds of what the zoning ordinance prescribes. So, and maybe this should come from staff to clarify. 105 feet is the base. And then the development allowance that can be granted is 40 feet above that. That's what we're asking for. It also stipulates that parking doesn't count towards height. That's how we're getting to the 165. So transition district, what that means, we're really just following what's in the zoning ordinance to the left.
Understood.
Okay.
So let me just give another follow-up question. What would it take to comply with the base height plus the development allowance for the goal of the project?
This drawing, this project complies
No,
with the base height, the development allowance, It does, because the parking doesn't count towards the building height. So we have 105 plus 40, and then the 20 feet is the parking. That's how we get to 165. Can the staff?
Yeah, actually, I think I can clarify and get, if staff will confirm. My understanding is that you have the base height, the 40 feet, the site development allowances that are listed in the ordinance are ones that can be requested that would not require a supermajority vote of the city council. Anything over, for example, anything over the 165
correct.
feet that's being requested would require, I don't know if it's 2/3 or 3/4, but it would require more than 5 votes of the city council to approve. So basically what the site development allowances do is provide flexibility for the city council to consider additional height. Did I clarify? Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
We'll hear it from
Okay.
staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Lindwall. So that would be correct. The by right height, to use a little zoning jargon, would be 105 feet. The zoning development allowance or site development allowance that can be requested without requiring a supermajority vote is 145 feet. And then they are proposing 165 feet. However, there are 20 feet within the building that are used for their parking garage. So that is deducted from what we're considering their height. So they are, in fact, in terms of the way the zoning formula works, requesting a height that is up to the maximum of what they can ask for without requiring a supermajority vote. Also, it's I'm fairly certain that because they're compliant with the inclusionary housing ordinance, that they do not require a supermajority vote anyway because they are compliant with that. So even if it were 146 feet, they would not need a supermajority vote. Another way of putting this is if they were proposing 160 feet or 106 feet, 106, that would still be a site development allowance for those in the public that this may assist.
I wanted to also just add one other clarification that seems to be lost frequently in these conversations, and that is that it is as of right. Someone could build as of right a building 145 feet tall here, 105 feet, plus 40 additional feet for parking, and that would be as of right, as long as all other as of right rules. Well, no, 185 would require a development allowance.
But just as of right.
Just strictly as of right without any development allowances. A building could be built to 145 if 4 of those floors, the red shown here, if those were parking.
Right.
We're not doing that, but it could be done here.
All right. I'd like to move along from this discussion, and I'm not concerned about supermajorities or not at council. That doesn't affect our decision at all. Mr. Grady, I'll give you a moment to summarize at the end after public comment, but is there anything you want to say before I open it up to public comment?
I'll point you to a couple of things that are in our application. I was going to go through these in detail, but out of respect for the hour and everyone here. So first of all, I want to point us to the last slide in our deck, which is the public benefits. I'm going to go past all of the standards. Slide 61. So we are hopeful that the members of the Land Use Commission will appreciate the significant public benefits that are being offered here. The alley repairs, everyone benefits from those repairs to the alley. There is an apprenticeship program with the general contractor, which will provide trade and construction education opportunities, which should not be underplayed. There are too few tradesmen currently. We also have a local employment program. As a part of a public benefit, there will be a scholarship of $50,000 in aggregate at Oakton Community College, focusing on real estate. There will also be an ownership apprenticeship program. I've already mentioned the alley management plan, and again, I hope people really understand that this actually is a net improvement to the alley, because it gets rid of all those lateral cars and 6 dumpsters. The 3 short-term parking spaces, again, which will be run on the app, on the Evanston app, so it won't call for staff time or police officers coming out there. We have a significant waste management plan. We've also volunteered to participate in environmental site cleanup elsewhere in Evanston, $5,000 towards a divvy station, and also the promotion of local artists. And there's more details in our application. Those are all public benefits that are not required by the applicant. Secondly, I wanted to focus on the conditions. We passed out the conditions. There's condition 4 and condition 5 have a couple of modifications. I was going to go through those in detail, but I actually gave all my copies to you. So, Chairman, you're saving another couple of minutes here. But I'd like to ask if you have any questions on those conditions to the application.
I just would like to ask a little bit. I saw the suggestion for the car sharing vehicles in the traffic report originally, and I guess my question is whether or not that's really, how that would be handled, or if it, I'm just not sure that that's really a particularly relevant condition, and I'd like to kind of hear more about what was intended.
To be honest, I'm just as perplexed on that condition as you are. I didn't know what that meant. To the extent that we can participate in card sharing programs, we will. We have them in other buildings, but I didn't, that condition was just brought to my attention today. I don't know where it arose from. It was the first time I had seen it.
We can get some direction from staff on that, but we're happy to participate. And if it means communicating with other property owners within 1,000 feet or whatever, we'll.
Yeah,
There's programs, there's businesses out there that'll rent car share spots within the building, and we'd love to participate in those. I mean, we have in several other buildings. They're beneficial to the population of the building.
Yeah, I just was wondering, because I just Googled, and it looks like there are several organizations businesses that provide them in the area, but I just.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what the genesis of that was.
Yeah, thank you. Then, Chair, two other points. First of all, with regard to the standards, and then I'll have one other one. We would be happy to go through each of the standards and how we believe the applicant meets those standards. Unless you insist on our doing it, we won't do that. No. However, we do respectfully request that you read our responses, that you please read our responses, because we earnestly believe that we qualify for them. A couple of other closing points, Chairman. Some people have said, oh my gosh, you're applying for 100 units. How can that be? The way it can be is the ordinance allows it. Our request is that you not act as a legislative body to say that someone shouldn't be allowed to apply for 100 units. The City Council has said we can apply for that. If you don't like that, perhaps put it in your annual report and ask the City Council to change it. But don't take it out on us as an applicant, because we have a right to apply for it. And hopefully you'll agree that we meet the standards. I hope you understand the distinction I'm talking about. Secondly, on the affordable housing, and although I lived in Chicago, I raised my kids in Evanston, Robert Crown for skating and the movie theaters, and a big part of what Evanston is its people, is its culture. We're hopeful that this board will say, here's an opportunity to grow Evanston. Here's an opportunity to bring 10 low-income individuals or families into downtown Evanston. We are hopeful that this board will say the Marion, with 150 seniors, is just as much a part of the community as institutions and organizations across the alley and throughout the community. We are hopeful that churches and other institutions would view this as an opportunity to say, here are 10 low-income families or individuals. Let's nourish their spirit. Let's help them on their path. Let's not turn them away because this building might cast a shadow on us. We are hopeful that the LUC will view this application in the context of the history, the tradition, and the culture of Evanston. With that, again, we respectfully request that you actually read our answers to the standards because we believe we satisfy them. Mr. Chairman, we don't want to take any of your other time. We do appreciate the chance to provide rebuttal, as you mentioned earlier,
Yep.
After public comment.
All right, thank you. Before I move into public comment, can we get the lighting situation straightened around in here? So all of my lights are back on.
Yeah,
This switch is not functioning when that overrides it back there. As we move into, there we go, thank you. As we move into citizen comment, I've had a request to the chair for the First United Methodist Church to be represented by Mr. Brown, and I believe Pastor Imathu is also here. And the chair has decided to grant 10 minutes for their presentation. So I'll ask you to come up at this point to do your presentation for us, please. You need the mouse back up front.
Clicker someplace? You can do it for me if you want. If you get the presentation.
She's just
up.
getting the presentation for you, and then I'll get you a clicker.
I thought hers was.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab it for you.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Yep. We're just getting it pulled up.
You can go to the fourth image. Keep going. Keep going, right. Yeah, advance to the one that says 4.
You can go ahead
Or I can do it now, I guess. Thank you. Very good.
and scroll a little bit, and let me know if you need anything.
Yeah. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is William Brown. I understand that Pastor Grace and Matthew and I have 10 minutes each. Is that correct? I see.
My microphone wasn't on. That's 10 minutes to the organization.
Okay, so now we're in 45 minutes, and, okay, got it. My name is William Brown. I reside at 1200 Mulford Street. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the First United Methodist Church, representing over 600 members. Our church has been at the location of 516 Church since 1870, over 150 years. Current building has been there since 1910. It's designated as a historic property and is an anchor of the Lakefront Historic District in Evanston. Just to understand what the neighbor is to the east of this building. I have prepared the following testimony with Bob Froucher. Bob can't be here, so I'm providing it. The observation and information in this presentation are based on the ordinance for D5 zoning location with no special consideration that would be part of a plan development proposal requiring special review and approval through the processes of city government. That's what these folks are asking for. Key to the evaluation of this proposal that it is in the D4 transition district. The name of the district says it all. A place where built environment changes from one context to another. The D4 transition district includes the east side of Chicago Avenue, where this development is sited. Next image. Or, can you? Do I have the clicker or not? Or? Oh, it's a mouse. It's the mouse does it.
Use the rolling bar. Use the rolling bar.
Okay, thank you. Not doing anything?
You got to click off there. Now you can roll.
Okay.
Do you want me to do it for you?
That would be lovely.
Okay, great.
I'll have to truncate my remarks since I'm only allowed a portion of the 10 minutes that I thought that I had. Anyway, so put up, yes, thank you. This slide 5 or image 5, and you have all this in a packet in paper for you to take home if you care to. It's clear that the height, bulk, and scale of the proposed development are contrary to the proposed intent of D4 Transition District. Next slide. Keep going. Thank you. This table comes straight from the 2009 Downtown Plan adaptation of the City Council. The proposed development lies on the eastern edge, which is the third row down on this graphic. Again, the clear base level height in this block should be a maximum of 66 and a max of 110 feet, even with bonus and adjustments, versus 165. Next image. The developer claims that they meet the code. Let's be clear. They have the right to propose a non-complying development. However, the Land Use Commission is the party responsible for evaluating that proposal. I'm not saying this because you all don't know. I want it to be part of the public record and for the people here and virtually that are listening to understand what exactly is the case. Next image. So there's a series of 4 slides here, and they show the proposed development failures of 13 of 26 standards for a D4 area, fully half of the required standards. I'll highlight a few of each in the 4 sections. This image, the development will be both interfere and diminish property values in the neighborhood. Next image, please. The proposed development's excessive height, mass, and density is in the transition district, and resulting shadowing, crowding, congestion, and safety issues will clearly have adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, and value of the neighborhood. Next image. The next 2 slides are standards specific to the special D4 transition district. These standards make clear the requirement of adhering to the purpose and intent of D4 transition district. The proposed building is clearly not compatible with the surrounding development of D4 transition district. That is at least 80% taller and in most cases more than twice the height of surrounding developments. It is clearly contrary to the intent of the D4 transition district. Next image. There will clearly be adverse effect on residential uses adjoining the development. It will not result in a smooth traffic flow, a minimum hazard to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. This block of Chicago Avenue is already among the most congested in the city. And I would add that the comments from KOA, while clearly have an imprimatur of fine standards and the latest things to analyze traffic, I'm at the church probably 3 or 4 days a week as its volunteer facilities manager, and time and again, the traffic in the alley at both ends, delivery trucks, you can't pass them. There's not 2 lanes, in fact, are horrendous congestion, and I believe that that will worsen with what we're going to have with this development rather than get better. There may be a restaurant, so on and so forth. Lastly, the proposed development clearly fails on many of the standards of approval that must be used to pass D4 zoning standards. If approved, this building would be a dangerous precedent for the D4 transition district. Thank you for that image. It would create slippery slope that compromises the D4 transition district's purpose and intent. And the most important, would seriously undercut the standards of approval, which the Land Use Commission is chartered to uphold. Further, developers could use an approval to undercut the D4 district requirements. So to conclude, the project is on its 3rd time around. We wouldn't be here at all if it met the base standards of D4. This wouldn't be happening. Not the first time, not the second time, not this 3rd time. At any rate, it's on its 3rd time around and still lacks sufficient meaningful adjustments to address prior community concerns from these people about the height and density. And has been said on other occasions, the outsized return on investment to Horizon Realty should not come at the expense of the surrounding neighbors. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Commissioners. Reverend Gracie Matthews, Senior Pastor, First United Methodist Church, 516 Church Street. I stand here to oppose the blasphemous height and density of the proposed building. Now, here's my surprising beginning. The Horizon Realty Group were my first friends upon my arrival to Evanston, July 2018. The senior pastor of First Church, Evanston, was retiring after 23 years. I was minding my own business, senior pastor in Naperville, Illinois, when the bishop called me to Evanston. I did not know much about Evanston except that it was a city founded by Methodists, the same Methodists who officially established Northwestern in 1851, the same Methodists who purchased in 1853 379 acres of land, the same Methodists who then named Evanston after a member of First Church, Dr. John Evans. These same Methodists founded Garrett Seminary in 1853, and they are the same Methodists who founded this congregation I now serve in 1854. It is called First Church, not because we won gold in some church Olympics, but because we were the first church built in Evanston. We have a marker in the city celebrating that that's the first spot that a house of worship was built in Evanston. That's us. If we got $1 for every street named after a member of First Church, we would be millionaires. Orrington, past member. Dempster, past member. Founding Methodist Wesley, and the first bishop of Methodists in the USA, Asbury. This is Methodist heaven. I could go on, but I won't. I just want to establish that when I stand here and talk about First United Methodist Church, I'm not a reed shaking in the wind. I actually represent a community that is intrinsically Evanston. Anyway, I arrived in Evanston 2018, July. I got an email. I went back, looked at it, dated July 23rd, 2018. It was the first email that welcomed me to Evanston. It said, "Dear Pastor E. Matthew, please first, let me welcome you to Evanston and congratulate you on your new appointment as senior pastor of First United Methodist Church of Evanston." Ooh, I thought, someone knows I'm in town. Nice. It went on to say, "I am actually the former executive director of the Evanston Chamber of Commerce, 1992 to 2010, so I have a great appreciation for the important role played by the faith community in this great city." I thought, ooh, a heavyweight in Evanston. And then it went on to say, "The other reason for my contacting you is that I represent Horizon Realty Group, HRG, and you may be aware HRG now has proposed to build a 13-story apartment building." Oh, this was getting interesting. I tell you this so that I can tell you that the front of the proposed HRG building faces Chicago Avenue, but their rear end pushes against our church's parking lot with the alley between us. And I am an alley user. I use that alley every single day. And I tell you, even if you pave it in gold, it is still going to be a hell of an alley. It is a nightmare. It is a nightmare there. You get trapped there. There's a vehicle parked at one end, a vehicle on the other, and you're stuck there. At the community meeting, the developer called the alley, stories about the alley, anecdotal. That was so insulting. I went home and said, "Alexa, what are the synonyms for anecdotal?" "Untrustworthy," said Alexa. "Unreliable, sketchy, subjective, old maid's tales." I tell you, when I tell you that Mary Ellen, 40-year member of the church, was at the hospital calling, and I got stuck in that alley for 45 minutes and ended up missing my opportunity to minister to her, that is not anecdotal. That is lived experience in that alley. I tell you, this building is testing our Methodist neighborliness. But back to the 2018 welcome
Pastor, I'm going to
email.
ask you to begin wrapping up.
I
please.
will not wrap up right away. Give me one more minute. It said, that letter said, "One of the issues confronting HRG is the already congested alley." HRG already knew it was a congested alley. I would like to say that when Jonathan Perman sent me that email, I called him my first friend because he understood the terror of that alley. Life got busy. I never met with him. But then here we are 44 years later. And I am looking at this and I'm opposed to this building. September 14, 2022, last year, you land use commissioners opposed the building 7-0. Nothing has changed from that meeting. It's still too dense, it's still too tall, it's still too high. It's still out of scale. Nothing has changed. And here we are. The Horizon Realty Group tells us City Code 611-4B. They tell us toss it. City Code. I'm almost done. I sat here and listened to them for 1 hour, 30 minutes. Surely you can give me 2 more minutes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner.
I have granted you 10 minutes to present, which is above and beyond what we normally give citizens. So I'm just going to... There is no seating time.
Sir?
So I'm going to ask you to wrap it up in the next minute, please.
Thank you.
1 minute.
They've asked us to toss the codes. They've asked us to toss the codes. They've asked us to toss the codes. Why? Because they're asking for allowances. And I don't know where this wild card of allowance, who holds it, but this is what I know. I suddenly found inspiration from South Carolina that those who have deep pockets and those who are able to exercise influence, which Mr. Perman tells me that he knows, he's been here for 20 years, he knows how the city works. I don't, I'm a newbie. But this is what I know, that from South Carolina I know this, that no one is above the codes, no one is above the rules, nobody is above the laws, not even my first friends. So I ask you, commissioners, to just know those of us who live there, to please vote this too tall, too dense building. Oppose it. Thank you. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move into regular citizen comment. As I call your name, I don't want to set time limits on everybody. I will ask you to be respectful of time because it is 9 o'clock, and I have 13 people, over here. 14 people signed up to speak. So when I call your name, please come up, state your name and address for the record. The first speaker is Jennifer Washburn. Good, thank you. Candace, if I mispronounce your name, I'm sorry, Heafy? You? Okay, please come up if you'd like. You're on both lists.
Hi, I'm Candy Heafy. I live at 1616 Hinman, right across the alley, just about from this proposed development. Really hard to follow Pastor Grace. I mostly want to also talk about the alley, but I was really struck by the concept that if the additional 4 floors, that they're like, we shouldn't notice them because it's like they're invisible or something. So it shouldn't bother us that it makes the building just extra tall. And also just one comment that about how if other people can build tall buildings, then we can too. It reminded me of many years ago when McDonald's, to have a McDonald's, you had to have these huge arches, until finally some people complained and they said, we will not have those tall arches. You have to make them to our standards. And I feel like this part of the community is saying, we do not want this tall building. Maybe you could get it by in some other part of the town, but we do not want it. So I was going to speak to the business about site circulation and design should be safe and logical, and location, construction, and operation of parking. Loading areas and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse effects. So I'll just mention, besides what Pastor Grace mentioned, that we've had a lot of high winds and torrential rains, and the alley, especially right around where this building is proposed, gets a lot of water in it. Sometimes people can't drive through it. That hasn't been mentioned. And sometimes trash cans that are even large will get, pushed out of the way. And one of the vehicles that parks in that space that is the Marion van. It parks there every day, and I don't know if it's going to have a place inside the Legacy or not. But that's noticeable. Now, the north end of the alley has two entrances, two parking entrances that belong to the apartment building on the corner. And it has the school children being dropped off. And then we're going to have the entrances for the cars and the parking vans. I have not been able to figure out how vans will be able to get into those bays unless they come in, pull into the church parking lot, and then back in. It's just doesn't seem feasible because it's very narrow there. Unless maybe the building is not going to come right to the edge of the site. Maybe it's going to be set back 20 feet, and I didn't catch that. But this turning around, being able to turn around in that area, I mean, now when you get 3 trucks in there and they're waiting, they pull into the empty space where the lowest restaurants are. But that won't be there anymore. And so I don't know where they're supposed to turn around. Because if somebody pulls their car out of the garage, a tenant, and they come out and then they say, oh, it's blocked here, and I was going to go out on the south end, they're going to have to either back into where they came from, or they're going to have to back out to Church Street, which is very dangerous because of people dropping off their kids morning and afternoon, and pedestrians, students walking around. I didn't hear where ambulances whether they will come to the back or the front. That I don't know. And I also wondered if those 3 reserve spots, what if somebody parks there and runs across the street to Pete's? I mean, will they get a ticket? I don't know. It's just kind of a question. The phrase was used about tapering down, but the first time, and I've been to all of these meetings, the first time it was Mr. Michaels described it, I had the mistaken impression that it was going to blend in with the Marion. And so I've always been surprised that it looks like completely unrelated, except for the architecture of the stores at the bottom now. But I think that it's tapered up, not tapered down. Unless the alley is going to be widened, I don't see how it could possibly work. Thank you very much.
Next up, I have Paul Breslin.
Paul Breslin, 1635 Hinman Avenue, Apartment 1. I live on the east side of the street across from the First United Methodist Church. I won't take much of your time. I really can't blame the developer for trying to get as big a building as they can. They're a business, not a charity, and if the city will give it to them, they have their rational self-interest to consider. But I want to address you as stewards of our city, whom we, citizens, and I have been a citizen of Evanston since 1976, count on to make wise decisions, encouraging but also wisely limiting and planning development. And I want to tell you what your decision tonight would tell me as a citizen, a longtime citizen of Evanston. I remember September 14th last year when the 18-story version was rejected, that a member of the HRG team asked you what height would be acceptable, and I heard the answer, 8 to 10 stories. Here we are with 15 stories, and I understand that zoning has to be flexible and that incentives are a way to encourage the kind of zoning, the kinds of projects that you want. So flexible is one thing, but this is not flexibility. This is alchemy. This is taking something that is this and turning it into that, something completely unlike it, and something that obviously was not contemplated when the D4 transition zoning was made, nor is it sanctioned by several items in the standards of approval. If you approve this building, you will be telling me and the developers, you can forget all that high-flown stuff in the planning department's site about standards of approval and zoning. We don't care about that anymore. We have ways for people to get around that, and we're going to let them do it. And if you do that, my trust in this body and in the city government will not be completely destroyed, but it will be diminished, and I hope you will make a wise decision. Thank you.
Next up, I have Jean Breslin. You pass? Okay, thank you. Rebecca Taverne? Taverne?
Thank you, Commissioners. Rebecca Taverne, 1635 Hinman. I am respectfully once again before you to request that you continue to deny any proposed development at the site of 1621 Chicago that fails to meet the established standards of approval for new development. I interpreted your decision denying Horizon's previous submission to be recognition of their attempted gross overreach, and they are attempting to do so again tonight. Your decision of 7-0 against their last plan was affirming and restorative of my faith in a city government whose first priority is to serve and protect its residents. I felt that my voice was heard and the standards were followed, even without my having the advantage of lawyers and misleading graphics from Horizon, whose behavior demonstrates these very standards don't apply to them, and we are to simply get out of their way. These are my greatest concerns with Horizon's proposal, and also demonstrate clear and egregious violations of our city's standards for approval. Most glaring, this plan is proposed in a D4 transition district, as you are aware, and is a flagrant violation at 1.5 times the height allowed and 2.5 times the units permitted. It is also completely out of scale compared with its neighboring buildings, as has been discussed, again ignoring the accepted plan for downtown Evanston or the comprehensive general plan. Even more worrisome, the congestion that would be caused by an additional 225 or more residents within this footprint, plus the myriad of Ubers, Lyfts, Grubhub, DoorDash, Amazon, FedEx, and UPS vehicles will overwhelm Chicago Avenue from at the very least, Davis to Church streets. The 6 parking spots in the bike lane that exist now will be greatly compromised. In addition, the already congested and narrow alley would be made only more problematic from the constant activity on their parking, egress, and loading docks. This added level of congestion is clearly dangerous and of great concern. Are they just ignoring the community that already exists here? The church, the preschool, or even their Marian seniors attempting to navigate outside their front door? All of these factors will damage our property values, as well as the quality of life we treasure as Evanstonians. My husband and I live in a condo on Hinman, and our residential community will literally lose sunlight from this behemoth. Its height such a blatant violation of our D4 transition district designation. This proposed development should be considered where the standards of approval allow for it, but this is not the appropriate site, clearly. Through all the resubmissions, the attitude of Horizon Realty Group is consistently one of contempt, both for the established standards and for those of us here who oppose defending our quality of life and our very safety. Thank you, Land Use Commission, for your volunteerism and your dedication to ensure that community voices are heard, and for ensuring that city standards that were logically and equitably established are adhered to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verne. My next speaker is Dennis Harder.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Harder. I reside at 522 Church at the end of the block which contains this development site at the north end. The Land Use Commission has a responsibility to determine the relationship between the allowances from the city's planning and zoning standards being sought by the developer for the site and the benefits the developer says will accrue from the development as proposed. This is a difficult and complex task. This determination, the Commission, is such that it must judge whether the developer's commitments, including alley improvements and management, trade and property management apprenticeships, local hiring, promoting local artists, etc., are relevant and are sufficient community benefits to warrant development of a structure that substantially exceeds the standards concerning building height, in particular, and the number of units in the planning and zoning frameworks. Do these benefits warrant maximizing, for instance, the 40-foot height allowance and almost blowing through the limits on unit bulk? It's equally necessary and important that this Commission consider whether there would be undesirable impacts from this. Call them disbenefits that are likely to result from allowing the current proposal to proceed. Many of these have been cited by others tonight. However, I'll add an additional thought. The disbenefits resulting from approving this development will primarily be visited upon the immediate adjacent community. Some disbenefits will be palpable. For example, the increased congestion, the stark visual impact of this development from the community side, and the wind and shadow effects. Another probable disbenefit includes that uneasy feeling that the city's planning and zoning frameworks can be picked at piecemeal until they're no longer relevant. In conclusion, it's my opinion that the proposed benefits are insufficient basis for approving the allowances from the zoning standards sought by the developer. This developer should either further adjust this development proposal toward conformity or seek changes to the planning and zoning frameworks themselves. Thank you.
The next speaker I have is Jeremy Vanata.
Hi, Jeremy Vanata, 309 Davis Street. Thanks for hearing me tonight. I sent an email earlier, and my plan was to read that email, but I'm just going to respond to some of the things I've heard here today. First of all, I would urge all commissioners to look at their statistics and how they're being measured. They measured the Marion with the cupola height, but they only measured their own building without the 40-foot parking allowance. That's how they got to the 14%. Make no mistake, when you go to approve or deny this, that building is 165 feet tall. They're asking for over 50% higher than what is currently zoned at 105 feet. Mr. Michael said, and this is a quote I heard him say tonight, we are adhering to what the codes allow, which is not true. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. They're asking for more than 150% more units than are currently zoned and less than 50% of the parking lots that are zoned. So let's talk about parking and traffic a little bit. Lots of talk about a reduction from what's there currently. I would like to know if, when they did their study, if they did the study with the retail and found in that space, or after they were denied the opportunity to renew their lease. Traffic northbound on Chicago. When you are going northbound in Chicago, if you want to turn right, that right turn is a red light for a little bit longer than traffic that's continuing north, right? And it only takes 3 or 4 cars to back up until those cars that are wanting to turn right are in the single lane of northbound traffic. With increased traffic there, and that's where everyone's going to the alley to park, and that's where all the trucks are going to park, it's only going to take a couple of trucks before all the northbound traffic backs up there. Finally, they mentioned that about 50% of residents don't commute. I count myself in that 50% of residents. I take public transportation to work when I go to work, but I drive all over Evanston. I run errands, I try to shop here, and I want to make sure that that gets captured here, that it doesn't mean that 50% of Evanston residents don't drive. They do. They drive around Evanston a lot. Horizon has adopted the strategy to wear us down. They present an egregious plan, fight with us on calls, and then amend the plan slightly and come back. I want this to be over. This is contentious, and I would love to see a plan come to City Council where it's within the development allowances. I want more citizens in Evanston. I want a greater tax base, and I want more people visiting our restaurants and retail shops. But let's do it without blocking the sky and do it in a transition zone that's actually transition. Thanks.
The next speaker I have is Isaac Suarez Flint.
Hi, my name is Isaac. I'm a Fourth Ward resident at 1214 Maple Avenue, and I'm also a junior at Evanston Township High School. My family moved to Evanston from Milwaukee this past summer, and the process took over a year due to the lack of not only available, but affordable housing. Access to affordable housing builds sustainable and diverse communities, which this project would offer. More housing, bit by bit, will make Evanston more affordable to all. Studies repeatedly and comprehensively show that the way to address the housing crisis is to build more housing. A recent analysis from the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research found that new market rate construction, which is typically expensive, does benefit affordability for lower quality housing in the short run. The study estimates that building 100 new market rate units leads between 50 and 90 people to move out of below medium income tracts, with almost all of the effect occurring within 5 years. Why do we refuse to accept the strong consensus among social policy experts that the way to make housing more affordable is simply to increase supply? Beyond the simple public good of housing affordability, we know that Evanston businesses are struggling post-COVID. An increase in population density would inevitably lead to higher economic activity, and businesses could begin to recover from the pandemic. This development would also attract more businesses to close storefronts, reviving downtown Evanston. I'll acknowledge that in a well-established city, opportunities for development that make zero trade-offs are sparse. Later, my classmate Emmett will address some of these challenges, but this location is better in many ways than others. It's directly on a corridor with multimodal transit options. It doesn't take away opportunities for programs like ADUs or the Community Reinvestment Act to function, and it increases desirable downtown density specifically with snowballing benefits down the line as shown by the Upjohn study. This is not a matter of supporting capitalist greed nor the people involved in this development. This should not be a matter of outdated zoning policies or units of measurement for downtown buildings. It is a matter of supporting the future Evanstonians this development will serve and benefit. With Evanston's current inaccessibility, this is a necessary investment to ensure a just and prosperous future.
Thank you. Next speaker is Emmett Evels-Dugan.
My name is Emmett, senior at ETHS and Ward 4 resident at 916 Elmwood. I'd like to start by noting an important feature not only of this meeting, but of many like it. In general, those in opposition to projects like this are much more likely to be present here for two reasons. First, research shows that negative emotion is a far stronger political motivator than support for candidates, laws, or even housing developments. Second, and more importantly, the people who will directly benefit from building new housing, those who will live in it, are not here because, of course, they don't know who they are yet. Those speaking in support are, through a few voices, speaking to the interest of the hundreds of people who will be able to find good housing here or elsewhere because of this project. I'd now like to address some of the more pertinent concerns raised in this and other meetings. First, parking and traffic. The problem with traffic is not more people being housed, it's more cars. This development in the heart of walkable downtown will attract primarily those with an interest in car-free or car-light living. We have a dense walkable downtown, thanks to good decisions about developments like this one. Every upgrade to Evanston's density makes us a better, less car-dependent city. Second, many neighbors are concerned about the building's height. But there are several buildings in close proximity that are similar and often greater in height, nor should height be our priority. An extra 40 feet isn't killing anyone, but a lack of housing is a much bigger question. Where I see height, I see dwelling units, and where I see dwelling units, I see a better and more equitable housing market in Evanston. Lastly, to members of the church, I hear you, but look to Matthew 25. I was a stranger and you invited me in, Jesus says. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. I say this as a fellow Christian. Our duty is not to keep our earthly buildings from shadows, nor is it to protect our alleys above the interest of those who need housing. It's to provide dwelling places to neighbors we have not yet met, and in doing so, carry out Christ's calling to us. Contrary to the assertions of many today, zoning laws that restrict downtown density, affordability, and opportunity for Evanston residents, present and future, are not the end-all be-all. Choose in favor of affordable housing. Choose in favor of downtown businesses. Choose in favor of density, walkability, and equity in Evanston. Thank you.
Speaker I have signed up is Bruce Annenbach.
Good evening. Bruce Annenbach, 45-year resident of 7th and now 1st Ward. I'll be brief and not repetitive. I don't know why the developer, once more, is before us here. I don't know why the developer is pursuing such an unlikely to be approved project. The developer is an owner. The developer has experience. The developer is the owner of this property. Surely the developer conducted its due diligence. Surely the developer thoroughly acquainted itself with our zoning laws, our ordinances, and codes. And based on that due diligence and development experience and knowledge, they purchased the property. So the developer entered into this with their eyes wide open. And yet they are putting forth a wildly non-compliant and non-responsive proposal. There is nothing in this latest iteration that should move any commissioner to change their vote. It is the developer's responsibility to put forward a project that will satisfy their profit expectations, that fits within the environment of our laws and ordinances and codes. The developer is responsible to pay attention to what the city and its citizens envision for this property. The developer cannot expect the city and the citizens of Evanston to help make their project profitable. With respect to comments on precedents, we need not repeat the mistakes of the past. The developer has come before us 3 times now. The developer has been rejected unanimously by this body at the last time. That's called developer risk. They took it, eyes wide open. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Clearly, they should most definitely lose here, and it's all they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Annenbach. Fred Tannenbaum?
Thank you. I'm here speaking on behalf of Fred Tannenbaum. And he's a constituent who is disabled and lives within, 500 feet or 1,000? 1,000. So I would like to ask the commission if you would consider in the future testimony, virtual testimony from those who, for these hearings. So from Fred Tannenbaum, he would like to say that I have repeated this at every meeting. I'm referencing the issue of the rear and front door access. There's not sufficient room at the rear of the proposed building for delivery of merchandise for the commercial businesses or delivery to the proposed retail businesses, residents moving in or out, or access for the church across the alley. The front of the building also has only reduced access for residents or guests using cabs or accessing cars to the front door. Any emergency access to the building would be hampered due to the lack of any driveway in the front of the building. Any traffic conflict, and there's traffic conflict with the Main Street on Chicago Avenue, as well as with the bike lane. Traffic in front of the proposed building would be a constant issue. Thank you.
And the final speaker I have signed up for tonight is John Hammerschlag. Are you passing, Mr. Hammerschlag?
Yes, no.
Oh, okay, I didn't know, I'm sorry.
I have my notes on my iPhone.
That's fine.
Good evening. I'm here as an Evanston resident and a parking guy. I live at 311 Lake Street, almost 37 years. I've been a parking guy almost 47 years. Some people consider me a parking voyeur. I was on the parking committee for the city of Evanston, but left, and this was either late 90s or early 2000, so that the city could hire me to be its advisor for the 1800 Maple and Sherman Plaza garages. And I worked for the city in an advisory capacity for over 10 years. I've also in Evanston been an advisor to Mather and the 500 Davis. In addition to the advisory services my company provides, we own and sponsor parking investments nationwide. I'm a full member of ULI, which is the Urban Land Institute, and a legacy member of the Transit-Oriented Development Council. I've been on the council for over 10 years. Comment I would make about the size of the garage in this particular project, 57 stalls is sufficient for a TOD development, and in particular with the Church Street garage nearby. What I was surprised I didn't hear from the developer or the other consultants advising him is that the capacity could actually be oversold, I would say, by 15%, which would allow for an additional 9 cars to be parked in the garage. It's common practice to oversell monthly parking, even in residential garages, and we have a residential project downtown, which, by the way, we park about, and it's a transit-oriented development, we park approximately, not even 30% of the units have cars. And in my capacity, when I advise developers, and I just met the developer for the first time this evening, I usually tell them to build less and charge more, and it takes care of itself. I like the design of the building. I'm not here to comment on the zoning. There are enough people, enough experts, and you folks certainly know a lot more about it than I. As a long-term resident of Evanston and having seen my most recent tax bill, or my most recent assessment, which is 50% higher than the previous one, I welcome every opportunity to increase our tax base. This is an urban block. This particular project would replace properties that are hardly redeemable. And the one negative I would have, and I would like the city to examine it, and it's not even because of this project. I'm often going northbound on Chicago Avenue and making a left turn into the Whole Foods, which I don't think I can do the way legally, I don't think I'm supposed to do it by the way the striping is set up, and they've basically taken out, 6 or 8 feet in the middle of the road. It seems to me, and as you get to the corner of Church Street, you have plenty of, there are room for at least 3 lanes. So it seems to me that the city should go back and figure out how you can get 3 lanes of traffic up and down that street, and I think you can. The last thing I would say, which has nothing to do with this project, is that if there's anybody in this room who has anything to do with the Evanston parking app, there is a mistake. They tell you that they're going to charge you a 35-cent surcharge if you don't fill up the full 2 hours, and then they don't charge it. They also tell you they're not going to charge it. So if anybody has any influence over that app, please change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammerschlag. That is all the speakers I had signed up tonight. Did I miss anyone? Not seeing any hands. Mr. Grady, you have an opportunity here to respond to anything that you've heard or make a summation if you'd like.
Do you want to say anything, Jeff? All Thank you very much. We respect the time, we respect the work that you do, and I'll be brief. It was music to my ears to hear those two young men come to this podium and talk about the importance of affordable housing, the importance of density, and the importance of reaching out to people. When the young man quoted the scripture, it almost brought tears to my eyes. It reminds me of that song, "Let the children be the children are our future, and we should listen to them." In brief summary, we've reduced the building in size, bulk, density, and floor area ratio by almost 20%. We have 22% fewer units. The alley is going to work because we're getting rid of all those lateral cars and the dumpsters. That's a total misnomer about the alley. The individuals who are here this evening in opposition to the project, as well as those that are in support, we respect their opinions, and we can differ in those opinions. But if you think about the people who've come in opposition to the project, it's the same small number of people, and I respect that. But as the gentleman said, it's the negatives that come out. The people who are in support of it, there are hundreds of people that live within the catchment area for the notice, and we keep hearing from just a very small few number of them. And as the gentleman said, we're not hearing from the people who would have the opportunity to live in this building, to contribute to Evanston, to shop and dine in Evanston, and we're not hearing from the low-income families that could benefit from the 10 units that are proposed for this project. Evanston's policy is to attract affordable housing downtown. This is your opportunity to do so. We believe that the application meets the standards for approval. We hope you will approve this project. Jeff, if you want to have any closing comments, I certainly don't want to deny you the opportunity because you are the applicant and you embody this project.
Thank you for your time tonight. I've been described as a lot of things this evening. I've been told here that I'm ignoring what the community's saying. I'm smug. I don't care. And I'm sorry if I come off that way. It's not the case at all. You know, as I've mentioned, Marks, we literally put our blood, sweat, and tears in this project. We treat the Marion like it's our own home, and we're going to treat this project like it's our own home. But maybe I'm coming off that way because this is like having a debate as to whether or not the earth is flat. All the remarks I'm hearing today are just their discontent with the zoning code and up in arms about what the zoning code allows. And I can only, I don't know what else to say. We're here attempting to play within the rules of what the zoning code allows. If they don't like the site development allowances, that's not my issue. I'm here applying for a project that I believe we've articulated, I think, as clearly as we can. It comports with your zoning code with 4 site development allowances that are within your purview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. With that, we will close the record from public comment and from the applicant, and we will enter into our deliberations, and I will begin by asking commissioners their general thoughts. Commissioner Halleck had his hand raised.
So here are my thoughts. I've been taking notes as I read what was submitted to us and also this testimony. I think I want to go through several points here. I think number one on the zoning and the height. Careful what you wish for. And I've seen this happen on several projects where this developer, any developer on this site, could have built a lower building of the same FAR, slightly lower. It would have been massive. It would have been, taken, property line to property line. And I certainly appreciate the fact that what they've done is mass the building slightly higher than it could have been in that low, bulky building arrangement, and then oriented it to benefit the neighbors, which is the streetscape, which is to put the narrow end on the east and west side. So that, to me, that's an elegant massing, and like I said, I think it meets the zoning with the development allowances. The issue of the transition zone, if you go back, which we don't need to do here, but if you look at that aerial diagram, you can see definitely how this building, it transitions from the downtown to the residential area to the east. I think the Park Evanston is 236 feet. If you count to the ultimate height of the building, 165 feet, that's, by my calculation, that's a 71-foot transition. If you go to the setback, not counting that top mechanical amenity, it's an 87-foot setback. I mean, how much of a transition do we want here? I think that's a significant transition. The parking, we've kind of beat that to death, that the parking that currently Evanston zoning requires is just not realistic. The existing buildings have proven that. And the Legacy has promised to lease additional parking in an adjacent or a nearby parking garage. The alley. The entire alley needs to be improved, and I guess, I don't know how we can put that, not a requirement, we can't make it a requirement, but the urging that be done as part of this development, because I think that's very important. The entire alley needs to be improved, but the alley is 20 foot wide. That's wider than most alleys in Evanston. The traffic consultant has shown, if you looked on the submittal, someone asked about this, that it wasn't clear how these cars and trucks can maneuver in the alley. They've shown how that's done. So that's been proven. They've said that they can coordinate move-in and outs with the church or other adjacent businesses. I think they've handled that. Benefits. I actually, sitting here for several years, I've never seen the list of benefits that this developer has provided. The construction training, local hire, scholarships, apprentice program, divvy, EV spaces, affordable units. I mean, there's a long list. So I think that's significant, and I think that's something we would look for in this project. Last but not least, I think this project needs to happen because Evanston needs it. It's sad for me to go downtown and look at how the empty storefronts, the few people on the street. The only way we're going to get that fixed is by building more housing and more office buildings. That will I'm sure upset a lot of people, because a lot of people just want the status quo. But that's not going to work if we want a vibrant Evanston.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other thoughts? Commissioner Westerberg?
So I agree that the development in and of itself can be a very good thing for that block and for the city. As always, my issues are with the scale and the scope of things. Again, this is the east edge of Chicago Avenue, and it is part of D4. And the intent clearly in the zoning documents is to keep that height down as you proceed east. Now, it is, even at 165, it is a lot less than what you have across the street, but the transition zone is not supposed to refer necessarily to the buildings in downtown. It's meant to refer to what's going on behind it. You've got a historic site in terms of the church, and everything begins to transition to the lakefront. So, I don't see 15 stories as being appropriate here. I also think we have to think about precedent. We're already hearing that the Mathers set a precedent. I think they did at 10 and 11 stories. That seems to be a reasonable height. But I think if you look at Chicago Avenue itself and you try to take that east edge all the way down and say that you can start building 15 stories, I don't think that's the intent of zoning, and I think that is an issue. I should mention that I don't think there's anything reprehensible about what the developer has asked for. The allowances are part of what they can go for. They've put together a very handsome building, and I think they need to be commended for that. But I do think that the height is too much and needs to be addressed and needs to come into scale with the zoning that's there. And then finally, just on the alley, it's going to be a difficult thing no matter what gets built there. No matter the size of the building, there will always be an issue with the alley, and the different stakeholders will have to work through that. I do recommend that if this is approved, the city really work hand in hand with the developer and the neighbors to make sure that the plans go through, that everyone can communicate, because this is pretty tight. Even at 20 feet, that is going to be tight. And one last thing on the public benefits. I think they're good, but I don't think that they justify the size of the project at this point.
Commissioner Linville?
Sure. I guess we're just going to go down the list. I also, while this project is an improvement over the last proposal, I still have a problem with it not being an appropriate transition. If you look at, and I think the last time we considered this, I kind of went through a bit of the history of development. But if you look at the 1993 zoning ordinance, which provided the site development allowances, one of the issues back 30 years ago now was to try to encourage redevelopment of underutilized sites, and this is clearly one of them and was identified as such. So that was kind of the reason for the added flexibility. But I think the more recent document was the 2009 comprehensive plan, or downtown plan, which identified this, or really kind of reiterated the function of this particular block as a transition block, and that really said that that what was contemplated in the 1993 zoning ordinance was really taller than should be allowed. And I would note, and as I think staff, it's pointed out, that really the base height for this particular site, and according to the plan, is considerably less than 100 feet. And the 10-story allowance was predicated on some very specific public benefits. I can't remember what all of them were. I think underground parking was one of them, and there were some other formulaic site development allowances. Those were never adopted by the city council, but I think that they, the notion that this should transition is very relevant. And I would, also note that, the 500 Davis building, which is obviously taller, was built in the late 1970s. The Mather was again built and approved before the downtown plan was created in 2009. I am not bothered by, I think that the site development allowance requests for the parking are, those two are reasonable. I am bothered by the height, and in reading through, which hasn't come up, we got one submission of citizen comments from Robert Hecking, who lives at the Park Evanston across the street, really detailing the how long the delivery vehicles, UPS and the other people are parked, and really, they mostly are using Chicago Avenue. So I think that while density in and of itself is not necessarily bad, I think that the added congestion based on those kind of newer delivery driver actions, really is something that we haven't really discussed, and it needs to be taken into account. And in fairness to to Mr. Worthman, that's not something you would typically see happen during the morning and evening peak periods. I drive down that usually I'm going south on Chicago Avenue, and the congestion on that block, or you have to be careful on that block. Usually traffic moves fairly smoothly, but there are a lot of people turning left into Whole Foods, and it is a problematic location. And I think that the requested height and density really is kind of a bit beyond what it would be appropriate. So I do have, continue to have concerns about really kind of what the intent of the policy, the land use policy should be. And while I agree that the building is attractive, it is too tall.
Can I
Yeah.
clarify? I thought the FAR that they're proposing is allowed.
Yes.
So the FAR is allowed, which is the density.
Well,
So
the
then
number
it's
of
a que-
unit, the number of units is,
Okay, but just the density, because I'm fixated on this, that, it could be a shorter, fatter building, or it could be a slender, taller building. And I guess everybody has an opinion, whether you want short and fat, or you want slender and tall.
or it could be
So,
shorter and slender.
well, it could be, but what I'm saying is that this FAR, which is the density, is allowed by zoning. It's not a question, it's allowed. So the question is, how do you mass it? So,
I like everything, pardon me.
No, go ahead.
I like everything about the project, except for the height in the D4 district. I think the intent of D4 is clearly transitional, and I think that the request on the height is a combination of maximum requests. The 105 is the maximum allowed, that's a maximum. And then the 40-foot site allowance, that's another request. It's the maximum of that 40 request. And I don't like the characterization that that extra 40 feet is a foregone conclusion. That's also a request. And then so that's a maximum of that request, and plus the parking. Now we're talking about way on one side of the envelope of the range of what should be a transition, and it's no longer fitting the intent and the in the streetscape. And when you look at the images, as much as I like the building very much, it clearly doesn't fit with the existing streetscape.
Thank you. I'll turn to my left now, and if anybody has any comments.
Sure. I'm actually in favor of this project. I agree with Commissioner Halleck. It's either way you can, I guess, slice your pie. You can either make it short and wider, or you can make it tall and slender. So for me, I'm in favor. I don't have an issue.
Commissioner Mierenchuk.
I have a different opinion. So, from zoning perspective, I think that the variances and the allowances that the developer seeks are really pushing the envelope. And they bring this really tall building out of the cityscape that is over there. So it is a kind of a over-imposing the street. And I will go further a little bit with the architectural concept. Nobody kind of mentioned, but this building being slim and tall leaves two side blank walls forever, because these walls on the property lines of the neighboring properties, they will stay there forever. We have one of them on the south side, and we'll have another one probably on the north side. And this will be a kind of a really, really sore eye, let's call it. The other thing is, once again, and I'm pointing this building has 5 apartments on each floor that are facing north only. So these people will live without seeing the sun, and this is 10 floors of 5 apartments, which makes a third of the building facing only north, the apartments. I know code allows it. I simply pointing it to the developer and to everyone. Simply the architectural concept of this building, I really doubt that it is successful for this project. So these are my thoughts.
I just want to make a comment on your idea of the north side. I was involved in a project that, a high-rise, all-glass, similar, and it faced east-west, just like this building did, so the long sides were on the north and the south. Guess what side rented the fastest? The north.
I hope you're right.
Well, I do support this project, and I intend to vote yes. Speaking of this project in the context of all three of them that have been proposed that we've been here for, I like how the bike lane is preserved and it's not interrupted by a curb cut. I know that's kind of from a former iteration, but it came up again today that was a compromise that was made, basically taking into account our feedback and working with City Hall staff. I like the fact that in general this project adds 213 residents to a downtown that sorely needs more activity. In brief, a lot of the points that Commissioner Halleck made, I think are very good points. I'll add to that this project endeavors to reduce the amount of retail at this site. And anybody who's walked around downtown Evanston can see that we have a lot of vacant retail. So to reduce the supply of retail and to increase the potential population base that will shop and dine at those places, that's something that is also I could see as a potential advantage to this. I like in this project that we have 2 loading bays. I know those are important, particularly as there are more deliveries and they're not asking for loading bay relief, which was something that was discussed before. I personally don't see a problem with the height. I think, as it's been mentioned here before, that this is the best height to massing plan I've seen out of their various iterations. We can, I guess we're having a discussion about what's the best compromise as far as a shorter, more massive building to a taller, more slender building, and I think out of the proposals that I've seen that this is significantly the best trade-off between the two. And in terms of height in the transition district, that was an issue I had with the previous plan. You have a building that is in a transition zone. You have a building proposed that is across the street from one of the tallest buildings in the city. You have a building kind of behind it in the Mather that is quite a bit shorter. And I think that this proposed plan is the best one that appropriately addresses that step down ethos that the city is going for. Broadly speaking, we don't want a look that looks like Edgewater, or with a wall of apartment towers, condo towers, high rises up against the lake. And I understand the broad concept of that, and I think that by having the step down from the downtown core to this site to the Mather and then further down, I think that aesthetic is really being achieved. On this site, it is a highly walkable, highly transit-rich corner. I use the bus stop on that corner quite frequently, several times a week. I walk that corner all the time, almost every day. I take the train downtown. I go and do my business in that neighborhood, and this is what we want in a city like Evanston. We want transit-oriented development in appropriate locations. We all know up here that we've had projects, as we heard earlier tonight, previous projects that we've approved to have less parking than is required, and then the developers come back and say, I'm not even using the lower allowance that you guys agreed to. You know, we heard, and actually, if I can digress and maybe ask staff a question. Mr. Chair, would that be all right?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were looking for, I thought you were asking them.
The parking garage that's immediately north of this proposed project, it was thrown out that parking garage is about half capacity. Does that seem accurate? Does that seem about right? The city's parking garage is close to this project.
Yes.
The applicant mentioned that it's about half full. Does that sound about right?
So we did meet with the parking division at the Design and Project Review Committee meeting. They did not mention the parking occupancy rate. I don't recall anything being mentioned about that, but I'm happy to confirm that with the applicant, and then we can include that information for the Planning and Development Committee.
Yeah, if you could just look that up. I know,
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I'm putting you on,
Yeah.
putting you on the spot. I just bring that up because it tracks with, I've used that parking garage. I walk past that parking garage often. I use it extremely rarely, and it tracks with my experience that parking garage is about half full. And that is the antithesis of active use. That's the antithesis of really what we want. We don't want underutilized infrastructure, and we have a project that is endeavoring to utilize that infrastructure that already exists, that excess supply that is already there. And if we require an overabundance of parking, that has a cost, and that drives down affordability. That has to be paid for by someone. And it has to be paid for in higher rents, higher purchase prices, higher taxes. It does get absorbed. So I do think that it's appropriate in this spot to have less parking. So overall, I am in support of this project, and in general, in particular, the changes in the iterative process that the developer has been willing to engage with us, with the community, and with city staff.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll note for the record that Commissioner Hugo did join us late, so I'll ask his opinion on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I share my thoughts, just for a question for staff. If a developer were to come in with 105 feet and then wanted to put some garage floors on there, is there a limit to the number of garage floors they could put in? And was that an accurate statement that they don't count toward any sort of height limitations? So they could put 10 garage floors up if they wanted to, and they'd be in good shape, right?
Sure.
With no need to come to the LUC for any SDAs.
Sure.
Sorry, maximum of 4.
So
there's, okay.
the limits, the principal use would still need to be a list of part of the permitted uses in the zoning district. So they wouldn't necessarily, I don't think, be able to put a full-blown parking garage, to clarify that. But with regard to the height deduction that's listed in the zoning code, the reason the 2 parking levels, their total of 20 feet do not count, there is a provision in the code that more or less is a way to offset the height that the building is going to be in the zoning code, because we're also simultaneously requiring on-site parking. So in a sense, to your point, they could theoretically propose a building with 4 floors of parking, more than 75% of the floor area per floor. That 40 feet would then be deducted from that. So if the building were 145 feet, 40 feet of it were parking, the zoning, they would not need a site development allowance to allow a height of 105 feet. Now, if the building were 106 feet, they would need to list out in the ordinance and in their zoning relief 106 feet, and then we would still list the overall building height by the number of floors. I hope that clarifies. I know it's a little bit of a complex thing, but it's intended to kind of still allow for parking on premise without penalizing the height too much, so that the building is not only parking.
Okay, thank you. And the reason I was asking was because a lot of the discussion here is turned on, what's a reasonable height in this transition zone, in the D4 zone. And I think in some ways the drafters of the various provisions have kind of told us what they thought would more or less meet that step down or tapering. I think that's what the applicant used. Provision, you're allowed 105, and then you're allowed 40 additional. And so whoever drafted those provisions contemplated at some point some LUC or planning commission or whatever it was called back then could theoretically approve something up to 145. Doesn't mean it has to happen every time, and for good reasons it may not. But certainly that gives me at least some sense of what was contemplated as a step down or appropriate tapering level going forward. Secondly, somebody put in there that up to 4 floors of garages don't qualify. So whatever the drafters at that time were intending, they weren't intending a 100-foot building of height. They were contemplating that in practice going forward, and Planning Commission could approve something up to 145, and in particular, in 2 more garage floors, you could be up to 165 as they are here, and you're still within the spirit of what was intended by the code. So, Commissioner Pactel, you raised a number of issues about they seem to be pushing the limit on a lot of the 4 SDAs that they're asking for. I think on the parking, I wouldn't say they are, because I think it's probably they're being aggressive in a sense. They probably don't need that much parking space, at least from what we heard from the parking, from some of the analyses and from some of the witnesses. I think the density issue, they're well under the FAR, and to Commissioner Halleck's point, do we want to go fat and wide or tall and slender? And I certainly think aesthetically what they've come up with is much better than going the wide and fat route. So for me, the question comes down to this transition issue, and is this height appropriate for the transition? And I think it is. And I think for me, an additional tipping point is the need for greater density in Evanston, more people living downtown to really help revitalize some of the businesses. I know our own building, the Rotary Building, I've got 600 employees. We've probably got 60 people coming into the office now. Whereas we used to have 600, that's 600 people out there buying lunch and doing all kinds of things and spending money. We're down to 60. So I agree with everything Commissioner Halleck said, except for the fact that I think the office buildings are of much less importance in terms of driving that density and driving economic revitalization in downtown Evanston. Much more important is the housing piece. And then finally, the low-cost housing aspect here. 10 more units. We need more low-cost, affordable housing in Evanston, no doubt about it. So I think on balance, it's again one of these, reasonable people can differ, but I think on balance for me, it's not unreasonable what the developer's asking for. It's significant improvement over the last two attempts to come to this commission. Rightfully so, they were denied, in my view, the previous 2 times. But I think this is good for Evanston. It's a reasonable proposal, and in terms of the transition issue, I think it's reasonable given the parameters that the code outlines for this commission to provide these site development allowances. For that reason, I'm inclined to support this project.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will save lots of my comments through going through the standards, but I will say a couple things up front. Number one, I am glad to see that we have been able to come down quite a bit in our height overall. The building is still an attractive building. I like the idea of having it came in the last round, but from the original one, having the slightly higher storefront along there to kind of make it feel not quite as drastic of a change from the Marion on down to the 1-story building that will be remaining still at the far end, at the north end of that. Oh, it's not quite the north end, but at the north end of this site. There's a number of other things that I'll go into during standards, since I have to go through those. And I'll just start in on that. So in order to recommend approval, which we are a recommending body for this particular project, we recommend.
Chair Rogers,
Yep.
I have one quick question
Sure.
for staff.
Sure.
I just wanted to clarify, the applicant noted that the canopy would extend over the property line. Does that require any other kind of zoning relief, just for the record?
Yes, the canopy does not require any additional zoning relief. They would just need to obtain a right-of-way permit, and that would just be done part of the regular building permit process. And to note, even if to kind of clarify something from Commissioner Hugo's prior question, a plan development would be required if any new construction over 30,000 gross square feet were proposed on the property. So even if the property is about 50,000 square, the prior gross square floor area was 15,000 square feet. So 2 stories of that, it would be even 30,000 square feet. So then a plan development would still be required. So it would still come, the height would not be listed as a separate site development allowance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and just to remind everybody, we are basically looking at 4 particular areas. The 100 dwelling units where 54 are permitted, 145 height where 105 is permitted, 57 on-site parking stalls where a minimum of 118 is required, and then the compact 90-degree parking stalls of 15 feet where 18 feet is required, and that's without any site development allowances. So that's just what would be what they're asking for in relation to what would be permitted by right. So now I will go through the standards. We have several groups of standards that we have to go through to find anything to recommend for approval anything. The first ones I'm going to go through are the special use, or do you want to, can you do this? I can do these first, it doesn't really matter. I'm flexible. Okay, special use standards. So there are a series of special use standards. There are 9 of them that we must find are met to make any recommendation for approval. The first standard is that it is one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance. We are looking at a planned development for residential and commercial, which in our downtown is permitted. I think it's been mentioned that we are in the D4 district here, and we do find those permitted in this area. Number 2, it is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. I think that we're going to have some discrepancy as we move through some of the standards. I think this is one of the first ones, probably. My feeling in looking at this particular project is whereas we have come down in height, I still feel that the height does not meet the transition that is intended for the D4 district. I know there are people who will counter that. I was doing sort of a straw poll, and I think we're about evenly split on things. And I think the height was one of the particular issues. There has been a lot of talk about the density being achieved either through bulk or through height. But there's nothing that says we also have to go to the maximum height that we can in any one zone. So I don't believe that standard is met, but I know some of my colleagues.
Yeah, I guess I would say that it is, but since the comprehensive, the zoning allows this, so if it allows 185 feet, how could we say that it doesn't comply? How could we say that?
Well, it allows it to be requested. It doesn't say that it needs to be granted.
But if it wouldn't say that it allows it to be requested if it wasn't a possibility that it be. I understand it becomes a judgment call.
Right.
But what I'm getting at, I don't think you can say that it doesn't comply if the zoning allows it. It's an opinion that you want it to be shorter or whatever, but I don't think you could say that it doesn't comply.
Okay. Number 3, it will cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. We have heard testimony basically that we're looking at creating more density in our downtown. Obviously, we'll be increasing affordable housing as well in this particular area, so there are particular benefits for the city. The issue becomes the negative cumulative effect, and again, I think this goes to height. And the fact that although you can build up to a height, I don't think that we are automatically destined to give that height. So I don't believe that standard is met, but I know some of my fellow commissioners will disagree with me. Commissioner Halleck, I'll look to you.
I don't want to argue with you on every point, but I don't agree with you on this. I think negative cumulative effect is, considering all the elements, not just height, and I don't know what negative effect height has, considering it's just an incremental. I don't see that I haven't heard testimony that increment affects anybody negatively.
I think anything built here will have an effect on the neighborhood. I mean, that's just what's going to happen, right?
Sure.
It doesn't matter
And
how
it
big it is.
will,
But as you increase density and as you increase height, you can increase the cumulative effect. I think this is one again, a
But I just
judgment.
would argue that the positive cumulative effect overwhelms everything else.
Well, I would agree with Chair Rogers and I look at not so much the through traffic again during peak periods, but really the increase of the Ubers and the UPS trucks and the deliveries that are generated by the additional units. So I think that there is a negative cumulative impact.
You considering increased taxes and increased people spending money in Evanston? Are you considering that versus Ubers?
I think that in terms of, while there will be obviously an economic benefit in terms of increasing the property tax base of the city from any development. I mean, that would be true of a shorter building. So I think that what you have to look at is what is the impact on the neighborhood in terms of, traffic, congestion.
Ubers will be there no matter what you build on this site.
Yes, they will be. Although they're, depending on how many units, you may have more or less, and what kind of units.
Number 4 is that it does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. I don't think that this necessarily is interfering with or diminishing the value of the neighborhood properties. Obviously, any development on this site is going to improve property values for neighboring properties, and so I believe that standard is met. Number 5, it can be adequately served by public facilities and services. We have no reason to believe that that is not the case. Any development that goes in this at this size and at this location will require upgrades probably to electrical, possibly plumbing, depending upon what situation is at the particular site. But I have no reason to believe that that can't be met. We do letters and numbers, and it confuses me. 6, it does not cause undue traffic congestion. We have heard some testimony about this, about traffic congestion being caused. I know Commissioner Lindwall has raised issues about Ubers, there's been discussion about UPS, Amazon deliveries, that sort of thing. My personal opinion is that it will not be undue traffic congestion. We expect to see traffic congestion at some level in our downtown areas. It's because we pack more people in. There tends to be more services that need to be delivered by vehicle as well as people using vehicles. I don't believe I do believe that this standard has been met. It preserves significant historical and architectural resources. The particular building that is on this site has no historical or architectural significance to which I am aware or we've heard testimony. So I believe that standard is met. Preserves significant natural and environmental features. Again, there aren't really any on this particular site. It is a developed lot, and it will continue to be a developed lot, and therefore I believe that standard is fine. And the last one, it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except for the extent which the regulations have been modified through plan development process or grant of variation. I have no reason to believe that this applicant would not meet any of the regulations that would be imposed upon them by other means or by the city. So I believe that standard is met. is met as well. I know Commissioner Halleck has voiced an opinion against some of my findings. Does anybody else have anything they would like to add? Commissioner Huco?
Yeah, I would just agree with, second what Commissioner Halleck has said.
All right, thank you. Okay. We also then have the special use for plan development standards. There are 5 of these. The first one being the requested site development allowances will not have a substantial adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, or property values of adjoining properties that is beyond a reasonable expectation given the scope of the applicable site development allowances of the planned development location. This is one of those, again, I think we're going to have some differences on. This kind of goes back to sort of the discussion we've had on the comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinances. Whereas there will be an adverse impact, I do believe with this particular height of the building that it would be a substantial one. I know that others will disagree with me on that, but that is my finding on that. Commissioner Halleck, I don't think we need to rehash it, obviously is in disagreement with me on that. The proposed development is incompatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Again, I don't believe that this particular standard is met. Again, going back to our step down, our tiered effect, I think if the Mather were closer and we didn't have immediate short buildings, I do understand we keep talking about the transition from our D3 to our D4, but I think when we look at our transition from D4 to the residential areas around it, it's a much greater transition, and I think those are the areas that were meant to be protected by the transition development, not the higher buildings.
Yeah, I'd like to also add that I think if you look at the block face itself, the other buildings are significantly shorter on the east side of Chicago Avenue. So I think that again reinforces that this is not compatible with the overall scale of development.
Number 3, the development site circulation is designed in a safe and logical manner to mitigate potential hazards for pedestrians and vehicles at the site and in the immediate surrounding area. We have had a lot of testimony about the fact that the alley will be used for the primary access point, but I think that in looking at creating as we say here, a safe and logical manner to mitigate the hazards to pedestrians and vehicles, and I would add bicyclists since there's a protected bike lane here as well, that this standard is met because we are trying to mitigate the overall impact on people that would be using Chicago Avenue and pushing it to the alley instead. The proposed development aligns with the current and future climate and sustainability goals of the city. We didn't really talk about this, but I know that somewhere I saw that, we have the LEED, the higher LEED standards that would be used, which is one of the things we consider. We didn't hear testimony, but there is a bird-friendly ordinance, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The applicant is shaking their heads.
And there's also the EV capable
And the-
parking spaces
Yep.
and the EV,
Right, right.
the
So,
EV part.
yeah, so they are taking into consideration the sustainability goals of the city when they're looking at developing this. And the final one is public benefits that are appropriate to the surrounding neighborhood and the city as a whole will be derived from the approval of the requested site development allowance. We've had some testimony on this. I'll say just from my personal opinion, it's nice to see some public benefits that aren't really kind of reaching for things that seem like, oh, I'll just throw something out there. I do like the fact that there's investment into people in this particular plan, in looking at apprenticeships, in looking at scholarships for people who are going into the industry, things like that. So I believe that standard has been met. Did anybody want to add anything either for or in contradiction to my findings on the standards, other than Commissioner Halleck, I know, doesn't agree with me? But we can't argue all night. Staff. we need to get rid of these. So I'm going to request that we do that by whatever means necessary, because these aren't really standards. These are kind of guidelines, and it's hard for us to look at these. These are things that, in my opinion, the city, if the city is concerned with these things, the city needs to be involving this as it moves through the city's process for building and things like that. But since they are in here, I will go through them to please staff. There are several general conditions that are applied for site development allowances and special uses for planned developments. The first one, each planned development shall be compatible with surrounding development and not be of such a nature in height, bulk, or scale as to exercise any influence contrary to the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. I think this one we've already kind of discussed ad nauseum through both it being in the special use and the special use for planned developments. Each planned development shall enhance the identity and character of the downtown by preserving, where possible, character-giving buildings, enhancing existing streetscape amenities, maintaining retail continuity in areas that are prominent. You know, we do have in this particular project, and I mentioned earlier, I do like the fact that at the ground level, the base layer is really kind of giving a nod to the existing buildings around it. It is continuing with retail, and again, does not have any curb cuts or anything like that to interfere with the general flow. Each plan development shall be compatible with and implement the adopted comprehensive general plan. As amended, the plan for downtown Evanston, as adopted land use or urban design plan specific to the area, the zoning ordinance, other pertinent city planning, development policies, particularly in terms of land use intensity, housing, preservation, environmental, urban design, traffic impact and parking, impact on schools, public service and facilities, essential character of downtown district, the surrounding residential neighborhoods and abutting residential lots, neighborhood planning, conservation of the taxable value of land, and building throughout the city, the retention of taxable land on tax rolls, which covers just about everything in the world. So I would say that we've talked about several of these things. We've talked about the housing and about how obviously providing additional housing downtown, and in particular affordable housing, has a great impact on the city. The environmental with the sustainability efforts that are being made. The traffic impact and parking, we've talked about quite a bit. There's been a little discussion on the schools, and the public services and facilities we've talked about. The essential character of the downtown district, obviously, again, creating taller buildings in downtown, the surrounding residential neighborhoods and abutting residential lots. I think that's where we've had some of our discussion and our disagreement. The conservation of the taxable value of land and retention of taxable land on tax rolls. And we've had lots of discussion also about the fact that we are tasked with trying to increase our tax base, and obviously a new building on this site would do such. Each plan development shall be completed within 2 years of the issuance of the special use permit. I guess that's not something that we really have purview over, but that's a city policy. So if you move forward, that would be the case. All landscaping treatment with the plan development shall be provided in accordance with the requirements set forth in Chapter 17, landscaping and screening. We didn't really talk much about landscaping. There was some discussion about a planter up front, but I've also noticed on the plans there is a streetscape with several trees planted on it and everything like that. So as though we didn't talk about that, that seems to be in compliance mostly with the landscaping and screening that's outlined in the ordinance. Site controls and standards. Oh, you've gone to it already, okay. Walkways developed for a planned development shall form a logical, safe, and convenient system for pedestrian access to all project facilities and off-site destinations. Again, we've talked about this with the fact that there is a protected bike lane in front. There will be no curb cuts in front, therefore ensuring safe walkways for everyone. Number 2, the location, construction, and operating of parking, loading areas, and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse effects on residential uses with or adjoining the development, and where possible, provide additional parking beyond what is required of the planned development. We've talked about the fact that because of the things I just mentioned in the walkability, moving everything to the back off the alley is what is being done. It does have an impact on residential, but that's because this is one of those rare areas where we have residential on one side and commercial on the other side. There's no way that you can marry the two without some form of tension. And then I would just say that also that this is a 20-foot wide lot, or a 25-foot wide alley, and so therefore it would be less impactful than if it were a smaller alley, which we typically find throughout the rest of Evanston. Principal vehicular access points shall be designed to permit smooth traffic flow with controlled turning movements, minimum hazards to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Again, we've moved all of the traffic into the alley, which should alleviate any interference between pedestrians and motor vehicles. And it being at an alley, it's an established, well-designated place, so that should be fine. The planned development shall provide, if possible, for underground installation of utilities, both in public ways, private extensions. We didn't really talk about this. Again, this is something more so for the city to talk about when they move through the permitting process. For every planned development, there shall be provided a market feasibility statement. We did have an updated one provided to us tonight. Thank you very much for that. And it seems like the market feasibility study is in compliance with what is expected. For every planned development, there shall be provided a traffic circulation impact study, which will show the effect of all proposed uses upon the adjacent nearby roads and highways. Amount, direction, anticipated traffic. We did have a traffic study submitted by the applicant, which seemed to be meeting what is required here. There was some discussion about whether it took into account everything, but that is what we've been provided, and I feel it does meet what is necessary. And finally, the zoning administrator may, at his or her discretion, require of the applicant additional studies or impact analyses. Again, that's something that is up to the zoning administrator to determine if she wants, as opposed to us asking for that. That being all of the many, many standards, we also had some conditions that were to be considered with the recommendation, which are on page 15 of 20 in the document from the city, the memo from the city. Those include the 3 on-street parking stalls immediately in front of the subject property be changed to 30-minute maximum metered stalls. And I heard this come up in public comment, but those are not exclusively for the use of this building. They would be for the use of any person in the city of Evanston who wanted to park there. They would just be limited to 30 minutes. The applicant completes phase 1 of the alley management plan dated March 2nd, 2023, within 12 months of final certificate of occupancy insurance. And that the applicant comply with phase 2 of the alley management plan dated March 2nd, but there's not a date added to that. Is there anything that we want to add into that, or is that just that they must comply with it overall?
That condition is related to the operations of it, so we'd considered putting in perpetuity, but just it would go with the property owner, that the operations of that, and
Okay.
it need to be adjusted if there's, depending on the
That's
tenants.
fine. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an oversight on something.
I'm sorry.
thank you.
May I ask a question on that? Does the city provide oversight if the project gets underway as to how that management plan is working out between Horizon and the neighbors? Or do you stay out of that and it's up to Horizon?
Are you referring to the way that the alley traffic is being managed once the alley has been improved and the property's been improved?
Correct.
Okay. So the city, I don't know that we have the capability to do that other than to make sure that they're complying with the plan as it's stipulated in the exhibit.
I would, excuse me, I would just suggest or recommend that there is someone at the city as a checkpoint person to be able to hear any comments from the neighbors as this goes forward. There are always issues. It's just construction. It's not anyone's fault, but I think it would be helpful to have a point person.
Correct, yes. We would, if there were any issues with the way that the alley traffic is being handled, we do have the 311 system. There is a drop-down selection for any issues with the alley. So we could direct the public to submit a 311 request as a complaint regarding the alley following the improvement.
I don't think the city would want to get into being a third party to this sort of an agreement.
I understand. I just think it can be an agreement that lots of things can fall between the cracks, that's all.
And I think that's when we hear from the neighbors about it, and then the city can do recourse based on that. But I don't think we want to be in the process of policing that up front. The fourth one is the applicant lease no more than 23 off-site parking stalls within 1,000 feet of the subject property via either a private lease agreement subject to approval by the zoning administrator or a lease agreement with the city for stalls in a city-owned facility prior to certificate of occupancy issuance. Anybody have any?
Well, this is the one where the applicant has suggested adding a sentence, the applicant shall not be responsible to provide off-street parking if the proposed development's commercial space is vacant and unoccupied. And I'd like to get a comment from staff on that one.
Yes, so that stipulation is consistent with some other recent plan developments that this body's considered. It's really intended to just make sure that they're not leasing stalls that are not going to be utilized. There's a prior plan development, the language was much more prescriptive with when the building is stabilized, whether it's 95% occupied. So I think that's the intent of the applicant's language here.
Okay, but it's acceptable to the
Correct,
city.
yes.
I think it's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Number 5, and this is one that the applicant had suggested a change to, so I'll read their wording. Applicant shall consider, based upon demand, adding car-sharing vehicles to the on-site parking garage or within 1,000 feet of the subject property for use by building tenants, or by building residents.
I'm wondering if this is even necessary. I'd be in favor of just dropping this one.
I'm fine with that, too, unless anybody really feels it needs to be in there. So let's just strike condition number 5. Number 6, the development complies with Chapter 413 floodplain regulations of the city code and the watershed management ordinance and the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District prior to issuance of any building permits. I think that's perfectly fine and sensible. The development complies with the city's bird-friendly design requirements, which you talked about just a little bit ago. Development complies with the city's electric vehicle parking requirements prior to any building permits being issued. That's something we've talked about, that being one of their sustainability, so I don't think that's an issue. Number 9, the applicant sign and agree to a construction management plan. It lists through several things here. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. But this is something we regularly ask for large developers to minimize any impact or lessen the impact, I should say, probably, on the neighboring residents and on the and the city as a whole. Number 10, that there be a final waste management plan elaborating upon and consistent with those items in the preliminary waste management plan, which was dated January 23rd. And that was the last condition, and the applicant didn't seem to have an issue with that in the things that they submitted to us. Public benefits. We've got a list of several public benefits here. The ones that they suggested, and I'm sorry I can't find that real quick here.
It's on the last page of the standards that I passed out.
Okay, I knew it was in here somewhere. I just couldn't figure out where it was.
The last 2 pages.
All right, thank you very much.
Actually, it's the last 3. The last page is blank. We recycled 8.
All right. The first benefit that they're proposing, alley repairs, we've heard testimony here about the 127 linear feet that abuts the subject property. They will be involved in making the repairs and for the area directly behind the new development. And then we'll contribute up to $200,000 towards the city of Evanston's share of costs associated with making repairs to the balance of the alley, should those be moved forward with the special assessment process. The second one being a general contracting program. That would be an apprentice, up to at least five apprentice opportunities in building trades. The next one is the local employment program participant hiring. The educational scholarship contribution, so partnering with Oakton College to work with someone to work on funding a property management and building maintenance scholarship program for students that are residents of Evanston, capped at $10,000 per student and $50,000 in the aggregate. Ownership apprenticeship program, having a workforce agreement with the city in which they will provide an apprenticeship for at least 12 weeks with the intention of providing full-time employment thereafter for a staff position of assistant property manager, assistant building engineer, or door attendant. On that one in particular, I would like us to remove door attendant. I think that we really should push for upper positions, if possible. The alley management plan, we've talked about that. The creation of 3 short-term parking spaces, that's one of the things that we've talked about as one of the conditions. Creation of an industry-leading waste management plan. This, again, was something that's been outlined in documents that were submitted to us, and one of the conditions would be a more finalized version of that as we move forward. Environmental site cleanup, clean up the site that is currently subject to a no further remediation plan by removing contaminated soil. Installing a divvy system for our donation of $5,000 for the lightweight divvy stations, and to promote local artists as well. Anybody have any thoughts on those different? If not, we finally get to the voting part of things.
Okay, cool.
So I will ask if there is a motion to recommend approval of 1621-31 Chicago Avenue to City Council, actually to Planning and Development and City Council.
Sure. Just as a question, we don't need to include the public benefits we've just gone through, because that's the City
Council call. I'm mentioning them to get them into the record, so those are the things that were presented to us.
Okay. All right. I move approval of the special use for plan development with site development allowances, 1621-31 Chicago Avenue, 22 PLND-0102. The site development allowances requesting 100 dwelling units where 54 are permitted. City Code Section 6-11-5-4B. A building height of 145 feet where 105 feet is permitted. City Code Section 6-11-5-8. 57 on-street parking stalls where a minimum of 118 are required. City Code Section 6-16-3-5, Table 16B, and 8 compact 90-degree parking stalls with a depth of 15 feet where a minimum depth of 18 feet is required. City Code Section 6-16-2-7, Table 16A, and subject to the 9 conditions that we've just reviewed. I think that's it. Did I do it?
That should do it. Is there a second for the motion? So it's been moved by Lindwall, seconded by Halleck. Would you call the roll, please, on this one?
Commissioner Arevalo?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Linwall,
No.
Commissioner Mordinchev,
No.
Commissioner Proctel,
No.
Commissioner Westerberg,
No.
Chair Rogers.
No. So with a vote of 4-5, the motion fails, but the recommendation will still move forward to City Council. And you can work with staff to figure out when you will be on their agenda. And if there's anything that wasn't clear in what we went through that you have questions about, feel free to reach out to them as well. That concludes the one case we did have on our agenda this evening. We still have a couple other quick items, one being communication. Anything from any of our staff?
I don't have anything this evening for the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a section for public comment. I think most of the public has left the room already. So I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
I move to adjourn.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We do stand adjourned until our next meeting, which will be on Wednesday, March 22nd at 7 o'clock here in council chambers. Thank you, everyone.